welcome. Have you not got a chair, Lucy?
That's fine, I'm just a quick
Well, there's another one over here.
I'll just take away.
Okay. Welcome, it's lovely to see you all here, and thank you for making the journey on a very hot day to Reading. I hope that this room will remain relatively cool. We don't exactly have air conditioning, but we have a cooling system which should keep us cool. As I say, it's lovely to see you all. I'm going to first of all hand you over to my colleague Lucy Jeffrey, who most of you will have met on email, if not in person, yes. And she's going to take us through a few housekeeping things.
Thanks, Liv. So just to get the boring bits over and done with quickly, if you need a toilet, you could leave the theatre and then turn left and go through the end door, and then there's bathrooms on your left again and in that corridor. In case of a fire, which I don't think you'll need to worry about this, but please leave out through the main doors, the ones you probably came in through, and wait around that grassy area in front of the building there.
The exits are there,
yes.
And there.
And behind. Thanks, Libby.
Sorry, I'm the air hostess here.
For our move to South Street later on, in the handouts there are directions and a little Google map image. At the top of that page there's a number for a taxi. A bus will also get you down towards that area. But if you need any further instructions on how to get there, please ask me or our lovely helpers today. I think Lucy, another Lucy, yes, another Lucy, at the back there will give you some pointers, and Sonia, who's currently at the front desk, will also help you out. It's really quite simple, it shouldn't be a problem. Please help yourself at any point to coffee and refreshment outside. At South Street, there will be wine and canapes from 6 p.m. The performance starts at 7, so there's plenty of time to get ready and hopefully continue discussions, etc. And then lastly, a final welcome to you all. It's lovely to see you, and I hope to meet and talk to you all throughout the day, so I hope you enjoy.
It might be just worth adding that we're filming this. Please let us know if you... at the moment it's only us who can be seen, but all of you will be heard, so let us know and we can turn it off if you wish not to be heard at all. Okay, I'm going to give a short introduction to the project, and then I'm going to hand over to Terry and Daphne from Dante Odai and Luke from Marmello for them to talk about their work on the project. So I'll just start us off. And I've written all of this down, so it's fairly formal. User-Not Found Social Media Technologies as Immersive Performance is an AHRC, EPSRC funded research project in the Creative Economy programme for the next generation of immersive experience. It's a bit of a mouthful, really. Dante Odai, a theatre company I've had a long association with, was already planning to develop a performance around the idea of an internet legacy following death. What happens to email, messages, text messages, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts once you are no longer here? Currently, the lives and memories of most people in developed countries are expressed and accompanied by their history of electronic communications, their social media interactions, and their collection of data, such as photographs, videos, and music. The plan for the project was to create a performance which not only addressed the issue of virtual presence of the dead in their online traces, but to present the performance through the deployment of handheld digital devices, which each audience member would be provided with. Dante or Die had already made a connection with Marmello, a company interested in new solutions to technology problems and who had previously worked on other theatre projects. Chris Good was also on board as a scriptwriter, and they'd been in touch with Dr. John Troyer, who is the director for Death and Society, the Centre for Death and Society at the University of Bath. By the time I joined the team, many of the jigsaw pieces were already in place. My contribution has been to frame the performance. I'll just give you those, if I can do that back now, just placing it. Those are our partners, and that just sort of sums up who these people who come together are. My contribution has been to frame the performance as a research project around two areas: the detritus of our virtual lives at the point of death, and around social media and its possibilities for performance. The topic of death enabled us to thematise the relationship between physical and virtual life and between individuals and networks. In the process of ageing, people may prepare for death by crafting their digital legacy, thus reflecting on their own identity and seeking to pass on a particular version of themselves. After death, the relationship between people and their social media lives becomes particularly clear, but also particularly problematic. And a little-known commercial sector has emerged to answer these needs, something that's significant to the performance. Websites and applications have been created to enable users to engage with death, bereavement and remembrance, but also with the legacy of their internet identity. Commercial applications offer services for closing, managing and perpetuating social media presence after death. In April, we ran a short workshop for practitioners involved in the processes around death: grief counsellors, solicitors, end-of-life carers, humanitarian celebrants, funeral directors and psychiatrists, to discover more about the growing significance of internet data to the decisions made at the end of life. We were surprised at the amount of discussion generated by the workshop and at the growing demand for account to be taken of internet assets at the point of death. We hope that some members of the workshop will be joining us tonight for the performance. Building the software, to change the screen, building the software to make the immersive performance happen has been the job of the technology company Marmello. In theatre, since the turn of the millennium, many practitioners, of course, have explored ways of bringing phenomenological experiences mediated by network devices into performance spaces. However, one of the consistent critiques of these practices is that audience engagement has been developed through spectacularising the technologies. The technologies become foregrounded rather than integrated. The spectacularisation of performance can arguably distance audiences rather than integrate them, rather than draw them in. Dante or Die, among other smaller companies, are concerned with finding ways to enhance thematic participation by deploying more intimate and accessible technologies in non-traditional performance spaces. With User Not Found, they use ubiquitous technology of the everyday. They have that have become kind of bodily prosthetics. By using these devices with which the audience are familiar, they aim to connect spectators in a more direct and intimate way to the theatre event. This is a short project, only 7 months. It ends at the end of July, by which time Dante or Die will have a theatre performance ready for Edinburgh and touring, and Marmello will have an app that can be developed for other performances and other events, but which will also, we hope, be used for deaf, I get my muddled here, which can also be used for deaf access purposes through captioning via smartphones technology, facilitating audience participation and interactivity. We hope that you will be able to join us this evening for the special performance of the show at our local arts centre, South Street. South Street is one of the places that has continued to support Dante or Die as it is developed, and we are delighted that they are presenting the play for us there. So we hope that you will all be able to come. And now I'm going to pass over to Dante or Die just to add something of their work on the project. I'm also going to just change this to...
What's going to be our background?
It's all the places you're going to. So.
You can start.
Fantastic. So, Lib said a lot about, I guess, what we had set up before the research project came into being, and I thought what we'll just talk about for a couple of minutes is how it's affected our process as makers. So the performance, it was inspired by an article that we read in The Guardian about a woman who lost her husband very suddenly and then had to deal with the online legacy of him, and it was a real shock to her. And it was a really beautifully written article that kind of looked at grief in contemporary world. And I remember going into our tiny little office and going, I've just read this thing that's really fascinated me. And we'd never ever done anything with technology before. Like literally we've had some phones and little mini rig speakers, and that's about as far as we've gotten with technology in our previous work. So when we started discussing what it would be, we were slightly terrified about the potential, but then also going, this is what it should be. I guess what happens when you come this evening is you'll get given a pair of headphones, which are wireless and silent disco technology. You'll get a smartphone that we give you, and everything will happen in live around the space, but within the world of the headphones and the world of the phones that Luke and Abhinav at Marmello have designed. So that's the kind of the concept of how it works, and I won't tell too much more about the narrative because that will ruin the evening.
And so we wanted to make, so our shows before were always in kind of real working spaces, and the choice to make it in a cafe was not so much because of the cafe, but was looking at the screen as a space, like this idea that a lot of us go and work anywhere in a screen, and anything could happen behind that screen really excited us. We didn't know at the beginning if it will be a mobile phone or a tablet or a laptop or how exactly it would work. And so our journey began with chatting to lots of people, not even knowing what we're looking for as a collaborator. After quite a lot of meetings, we were told we need to look for a creative technologist. Everyone ever hear this term? Because that was our first time. And then we met with the Marmellos. So when we came into the room, it was really starting to explore everything and put everything on the table. Could it be on people's own phones? That was a really big question at the beginning, which we've rejected because we thought, because I myself didn't go to see shows because I didn't have enough space on my phone and didn't want to delete my photos or whatever. Or because some people might not have a smartphone still and just consider that in terms of inclusivity. What's the size of the screen? There were a lot of things we assumed we can do. Oh, we're just going to run it all from one phone, and then it will just stream it all to all the others. Quite quickly we discovered that's not possible. So the first 2 weeks of exploration were a lot of, oh, can we do this? Oh no. Okay, oh, so let's do that. Oh, so there was a lot of just exploring what our boundaries are, and Marmello were very kind by saying, let's just try and make any idea happen and not try and start with what's not possible. So we decided to give people phones and give people headphones so they don't feel like they're in charge of the equipment. We also decided, we had a lot of conversations about interactivity and what makes a show interactive, and the use of that word became quite important. Is it interactive if you press a button and then it affects something else in the internet? Or could it be interactive with you being more of an observer but immersed in the story told through that technology?
That would be lovely to talk about after you've seen it this evening.
And I suppose technology wasn't just in the collaboration with Marmello, so technology extended to the headphones we're using, so they're wireless headphones, and how the sound is taken from the phones, but also from the live, but also pre-recorded. Technology was also integrated into the lighting design, which is all wireless, and we've made this, well, you'll come and see this evening, but that really affected our process of making the show. We're a theatre company, we're used to getting into a room and devising, and then after 4 weeks we have a show, and that process was torn apart because every collaborator had a different rhythm of working. So we broke it down a lot more, and it feels like we've constantly worked on it for 2 years because everything takes longer than expected.
Thank you.
I'll just cover.
Luke from Marmello.
Sorry, from Marmello. I'll just cover a bit from our perspective. So Marmello is a digital agency in the commercial sense. We build websites and apps and things for companies who want kind of flashy websites. And we do that to make enough money so that we can do things that we enjoy doing as well. One of those things is collaborations with creatives. The stuff we've done before has all been still on that commercial edge. So we work with essentially partners and sponsors like Intel when they've partnered with institutions like the RSC. So this was the first time that we were, I guess, part of the company, which is very exciting for us. And it was a real eye-opener is underselling it. It's been a very, very different way of working, and it's been really good, I think, for us. It's fed through to how we do all the rest of our work in understanding different creative processes from the ones that we're used to. The commercial digital world is full of people who, when they see the word creative, what they think of is quite a strict Silicon Valley creative, where you are design thinking and your user needs, and you're very focused on building services and applications for people that are things that will scale to 1 million people across the world, and it's built around that model. So when we build things in what is actually quite a process-driven way, which is getting a product out quick, and then iterating it. So a very interesting thing for us was coming to a space where we were partners, and we could collaborate and we'd come up with ideas, which was fantastic. What we definitely found is at the start, we fell back to a very much here are all the constraints. Tell us what the things you'd like, and we'll tell you why you can't have it situation. And I think that obviously that's important, but we've enjoyed over the last 2 years, and it has been great to have a long-term collaboration, which is not something we can normally do. It's been great having a situation where we're able to actually push the boundaries in some ways and come up with things that we thought wouldn't be possible. I was going to talk a bit more about the technology behind it, but I've decided not to give you too much detail. I think if you, and this is something we discovered quite early on, if you're very, very aware of this device during the performance, it will, I think, negatively impact your enjoyment of the performance. And if you're looking for the strings, I think you will end up looking around and thinking too much about why it's happening. But that logistical stuff and what we can and can't do, that was fascinating. When we build technologies, we don't normally have to worry about anything happening live alongside them. And it quickly became apparent that even a second's delay from my mouth moving to you getting the sound is totally, will totally disrupt your experience of performance. A slight delay in something happening on the phone compared to the person sitting next to you will disrupt your appreciation of the performance as well. So there's a really tight, traditional engineering technology problem to solve, which is how do we make sure this thing happens well and properly for everyone, and how can we fix problems when they occur, and how do we make it robust. And then there was a slightly more creative challenge, which is we've been spending a lot of time building this thing, but ideally it's something that you guys don't ever really notice or care about. Our ideal is you come in, there's a phone, it feels and looks and acts like a phone does, not too much like your phone that it's distracting like it, but familiar rather than identical to the normal phone experience. So it needed to be something that that felt right. It also needed to be something that could cope with not being a phone at points. I won't go into more detail about that to give anything away, but it needs to be something that can cope with performance as well as just recreating a phone. So I won't go. I was going to talk a little bit more about the technical stuff, but I won't. And I think I will happily answer questions by email at some point if people want to know. Because yeah.
Thanks.
Is there anything else you'd like me to cover?
No. Well, we're going to do a streamed event, aren't we, about which we'll unveil.
Yeah, we will do a webinar
Yeah.
which will cover in boring detail all the technical stuff behind it. But it's worth saying. I would say it's interesting. If someone had come to me 2 years ago and said, "We want to build this. How long will it take? We've got performance in a couple of months," I would be like, "Yeah, I think that's probably fine." And now, yeah, it's fine. But we've been through 420 iterations of the app.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
That's the number of commits on our version control.
We're definitely not paying you well enough.
It's not our version
And we're not
control
paying you
moment.
well enough.
But it has been. But it's worth saying like that. The process only works, I think, if you are partners, because there is no off-the-shelf version of this. There's no way. And it's interesting. We're very interested in selling the idea and making some money out of it at some point. But it is definitely something that what is going to be profitable for us is all the learnings from it, not the code. You know, we can delete the code and start tomorrow, and we can build it again in a day because we've learned through the process, and that's the 99% the value of the project for us has been that process, not the final product.
And that's so interesting in terms of aligning that with a theatre making process, isn't it? Because every single theatre making process is like that. Yeah.
And connecting that to a research project. Okay, thank you very much. I think you're going to go now, aren't you?
We are, I'm afraid. We have to
Sad.
go make it happen
Prepare.
tonight. You'll be the second audience we've ever done it for, so it's all very new. So apologies, we'll miss
But
out.
we saw it in Ipswich 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
and it went very smoothly. From an audience point of view.
Yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. Really well said.
Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, enjoy.
Thank you very
See you
much.
later.
So I'm going to pass over to Lucy now and ask Dan and, well, do you want to, Dan, do you want to stay there for the moment, or do you want to, yeah. Do you want to stay behind? Let's move.
So whilst we're moving chairs and so on, I'll introduce our next speakers for our practitioner presentations. And I'm delighted that we have Jo Scott and shortly afterwards Dan Barnard with us today to share with us some exciting mixing and latest discussions about Fan Shen. So to begin with Jo, Jo Scott is an intermediate practitioner researcher and lecturer at the University of Salford. Her work addresses live media practices and the effective relationships between the performer and digital materials with which they perform. Today she's going to be talking to us and sharing with us her intermediate practices in the wildscapes of Salford. And if you're ready, that's great.
Hello. As Lisa said, my name's Jo, and I'm going to be presenting today. First of all, I wanted to say thank you very much to Liv for the invitation to be here, and thank you to Liv and Lucy for organising today. And also just an initial apology for being slightly off topic. I'm neither going to talk about social media technologies nor immersive theatre, so I'm aware that I'm not exactly kind of aligning with the title of the project. However, I hope that what I am going to talk about, which is to do with wildness and digital practices, will hopefully have some kind of resonance with what we discuss and talk about later on. So for the past 3 years as a researcher, I've been applying intermedial practice to my home locality, which is Broughton in Salford, addressing its cultural history, present manifestations and hidden areas, using these practices to try to explore the concurrent regeneration and neglect of the area, as well as place attachment and why we feel the way we do about the places we inhabit. My research is involved primarily documenting my impressions of Broughton in sounds, words, music and images, and then mixing these together in live events, as well as using them in workshops for local residents and installations which have been positioned around venues in the area. But most recently, I focused my attention on 3 green spaces near to where I live that could be categorised as urban wildscapes. So Anna Jorgensen defines a wildscape as urban spaces where natural as opposed to human agency appears to be shaping the land. And the largest and most prevalent example of this kind of area near to me is a wooded nature reserve, which is called Kersal Dale. And that's been the primary focus for my creative research in recent months. So today, what I'd like to consider is the intersection of wildness in this urban green space with my digitally enabled, broadly improvised intermedial practice, because this has proved to be quite instructive, but also quite perplexing so far, and has offered some rich, but quite knotty, practical and theoretical options for how the work may move forwards. So first of all, what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about the practice and then introduce you to the wildscape, which is Kersal Dale. So my intermedial practice in all of its forms is led by affective pulls. Affects manifest within the work as forces and movements, and this is outlined quite usefully by Nigel Thrift with reference to what I would consider to be 3 affect big hitters, Spinoza, Deleuze and Masumi. And Thrift highlights Spinoza's focus on alliances and relationships, where affect is the property of the active outcome of an encounter, Deleuze's language and practice of different speeds and intensities, as well as Brian Masumi's claim that affect is autonomous to the degree that it escapes confinement in the particular body whose vitality or for potential for interaction it is. So I guess what I wanted to say in relation to those kind of ideas was the focus on affective states as alliances, as forces, as intensities and as movements, equally as autonomous, is quite active in my understanding of the way in which this type of practice works for me. Particularly as an exploratory act. So what I do is I tend to use the act of mixing things to perform a movement through feelings and ideas that I may have in relation to the experiences and materials that I'm mixing. But I'm searching for something like a resonance, combinations, relationships, alliances that may give rise to a particular kind of intensity. And I do think, as Masumi claims, that that's often independent of the kinds of entities and bodies and materials that are involved within the mixing. And therefore, there's always a reaching, searching and wandering quality to that process. So I'll move on now to tell you a little bit about Kersal Dale. So Kersal Dale is a designated local nature reserve which took on its unique wildness in the wake of a major landslide. This was in the 1920s, and that rendered the site unsafe for buildings. So these opulent riverside residences that had been in place next to the river, which were occupied by rich industrialists, more than 50 years earlier were then abandoned and fell into ruin. And as you can see, evidence of these houses and their grounds, so things like tree-lined avenues, bricks, stones and the outlines of structures have now been quite beautifully enfolded in nature. And they've been made wild, I think, really, through the insistent growth and natural succession of the plants that have flourished there. Equally, Kersal Dale feels wild. It's quite difficult to navigate, there are no maps of the reserve, and the paths often become impassable after there's been a lot of rain. But since starting this research, I've regularly walked there to sample the environment in a number of ways, through capturing short clips of video, sounds on audio recorders, and voice memos of thoughts and experiences. Alongside this, I've also developed some musical and sung refrains in response to the space and also to its history.
Perhaps in the night, when the way is treacherous, when you are safe below.
So researching this area has brought me to theories of wildness, which I'm going to discuss today in relation to digitally treating this wild urban place. I walked into Kersaldale about a week ago, after I hadn't been there for about a month. I was overwhelmed by its ferocious growth and greenery, how it had become utterly other through the warm early summer months. And when I dropped off the path into it, I felt enclosed beyond. But I was also bewildered as to in what way I could capture, express, or respond to that particular change using the mobile digital technologies and software that were available to me. Wildness, Robert Macfarlane states, can be seen as an energy both exemplary and exquisite, a quality of aliveness or self-ablazeness or continuous coming into being, to which Chinese Shanshui artists give the name Ziran. Giving attention to the consistent newness of the natural world, it's what Macfarlane calls constant and fecund present, means also seeing wildness as he describes it as process, something continually at work in the world, something tumultuous, green, and joyous. And for me, the joy of an urban wildscape in particular then is that unexpected encounter that it offers with nature in riot, particularly in the spring and summer, on the edge of, or indeed in the centre of spaces that are formed to, subject to, and managed by human agency. The non-human processes that shape the wildscape are particularly appealing and arguably healing, renewing and refreshing to the spirit of the urban dweller. They're also part of an everyday wildness, celebrated by theorists such as Jack Turner, who says, "We are embedded in it, permeated by it, saturated with it, constructed by it, and maintained by it. We owe our existence to it. The idea that we have to go to Yellowstone to find or experience the wild is absurd. We simply must learn to switch scales with ease, moving deftly from the vastly big to the infinitesimally small, integrated hierarchies." In a similar way, Robert Macfarlane describes sleeping in a meadow and engaging with these infinitesimal processes continually happening there. He says, "I could hear the ongoing business of the meadow, the shifting of grass stalks, the shy movements of animals and insects, and again I felt a sense of wildness as process. This all-encompassing sense of the burgeoning of life in and around us is certainly heightened in the intense greenery of Kersaldale and its rampant, raucous and riotous growth. Gavin Van Horn also indicates that Wilde's etymological associations with self-will mean that Wilde indicates autonomy and agency, and a will to be and a unique expression of life. While Jack Halberstam speaks of Wilde as a space, name or critical term for what lies beyond current logics of rule, which can give us access to the unknown and to the disorderly. So, wildness through those kind of theoretical lenses can be understood in relation to a boundless energy, but also a kind of sense of beyondness, otherness, danger and loss of control, alongside a ferocious will to be and do on part of both humans and non-humans. And I guess I recognise quite clearly a lot of those qualities when I go to Kersaldale. They jangle there in a range of sometimes unnerving, sometimes exciting, sometimes energising combinations. But when I digitally sample that experience and take those samples back to a mixing desk, what is it that I'm trying to do, and what am I actually able to do? What wildness can remain present in a digitally enabled, screen-based, technologically parametered mixing practice? So before I answer that question, I'm going to firstly talk through some kind of emerging thoughts that I've got, which are connecting up digital, or digitality, I suppose, and wildness. Contemporary digital culture and devices embody contradictions and dualities. A felt restriction, a framing of the world, that if it does not deny the expansiveness of landscape around and within us, at least frames a version of them on a screen or through an algorithm, restricting, shaping and reformulating experience. But on the other hand, there is this continuous process to the digital, this boundless present of constantly updating, shifting digital spheres. The information that's being made and presented, the endless data and slotting up news feeds and images and images and images that are overwhelming, burgeoning and beyond the scope of our capacity to see and respond. Perhaps then, like the ways in which User Not Found addresses the intersection of digital and death, its peculiarities, its problematics, its contradictions, I guess I see something similar in my trudging into a close-up natural wildness to try and sample its qualities in zeros and ones, through a system I will never really fully understand and which is literally beyond me because of what post-digital theorists such as Berry and Dieter call anagnosis, or the way in which computation facilitates a systemic production and maintenance of ignorance. And indeed there is a constant and consistent beyondness, a kind of precipice that I feel when interacting with software, with apps, with programs, of which I understand so little, and which seem to extend so far beyond, below, around, and inside me. In that sense, digital is other, apart, wild, and beyond, despite its desperate and quick-formed familiarity and intimate positioning in our lives, and the fact that, like wildness, it is everywhere, permeating spaces, affects, relationships, actions, interior landscapes. Equally, and I think significantly for me in relation to this project, there are non-human agencies at work in digital spaces as there are in wild green spaces. So returning to kind of the practice element of this, the way I've been looking at digitally mixing urban wildscapes, I use a number of digital tools that are made for live performance. So a loop, pedal, VJ software that you see me using here, and a sampler. And what they do is offer this potential that I've been talking about to constantly shift, remake, move on and reformulate. They're tools that are always asking questions as to what I might want to do with the materials that I bring back from an experience. Endless possibilities for changing and shifting the input into the output. Some of these words may be familiar to you. Vectorize, posterize, loop, delay, octave, fuzz, phaser, flanger, reverb, alpha blur, alpha crop, alpha level, vibrance, vignette, glow, halftone, refraction, radial blur, slide, squash, stretch, tile. I finished with tile because actually I did kind of by accident fall upon the idea of tiling images, and it became quite interesting to me in relation to this project. I've got a bit of a fascination, I think, with what happens when you put images together. So what you're seeing here is an image that's been multiplied and then just turned around a few times to make a kind of seamless pattern, essentially. And I think what I love about these types of images in relation to the idea of wildness is there is a kind of a pulsing, not quite there energy, and they create quite organic, primeval, unexpectedly natural kind of shapes, even though they're very kind of digitally formulated images. And I also like the way in which a kind of a breath of wind or just a shift in light within the actual space can be reflected in these kinds of images, just kind of appearing and then disappearing. But the thing is really that I enjoy working with them, and the process of making them has that kind of energy to it. But as soon as I try and place something like this into a predetermined mix or a fixed media work, something happens, it kind of falls apart, and a self-ablazeness, if you want to put it like that, is lost, because it's not existing in the moment of its making. And I think that links to the final point that I want to make about wildness and the digital, which is to do with improvisatory digital practices. So I tend to, when I perform live, improvise, and there is something in the processual and live act of improvising with digital tools that I think links to some of those theories of wildness. There's this kind of felt beyondness of the work which stretches way beyond your reach and knowledge. There are the chaotic elements, there are the mixture of human and non-human affects and agencies, and this general tumultuousness of how an improvised performance feels, particularly when you're working with these kinds of tools. So that's maybe the point of connection that I'm coming to now, which is the kind of way in which the non-human qualities of both the digital tools and the natural wildscape might come together, which links in with kind of a recent turn, non-human turn in theory, and intersects with the meeting of the naturally wild and the wildly digital. So that's offering me a prompt now to perhaps engage more with the wildness of the digital as it happens within and through an improvised practice, allowing something which is always emerging, always happening, to then enter into conversation with the present of the growth of things which are wild and particularly in wild spaces.
Birds titter their celebration. Snake inwards to my legs, encircle my arms and draw me into you. A way of forgetting, being folded up, while the birds titter their celebration. Snake inwards to my legs. Take me back, take me back, take me back. Take me back, take me back, take me back, take me back, take me back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, for such a transfixing presentation and demonstration of your work and research. Would it be okay if we did questions with both you and Dan at the end?
Of course,
Okay,
absolutely.
great. So our next speaker, Dan Barnard, is Artistic Director of Fanshen and Senior Lecturer in Drama and Performance at London South Bank University. Fanshen's digital practice includes Invisible Treasure, The Justice Syndicate, Disaster Party and Out of Sight. And in a moment, I think, whilst we make some changes to the technological setup of the desk. Do you need any help?
It's working before. I think it knows we're going to critique it, so it's good. I'm going to try putting it in the other socket, just in case that does something.
Sometimes you just unplug this and
Yeah, I just moved it. I mean, I might just talk for a bit, but ideally I'll show some video in a little while so that you will see. It keeps doing this, it's spontaneous. Great. Awesome. Cool, hello, I'm Dan. I'm Artistic Director of Fanshen. I co-run Fanshen with Rachel Briscoe. I also work part-time as a Senior Lecturer in Drama Performance at South Bank University, where I'm part of the Centre for Digital Storymaking and the Performance and New Technologies Research Group. The Twitter handle FanshenX Theatre, I'm going to come back to that X in a little while. But yeah, that's me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Fanshen, give you a brief context about Fanshen. I'm going to talk briefly about 3 different projects. List for the End of the World, Alvita Adams is Coming Home, and Looking for Love. At the end, I might try and attempt a bit of theorization, but I don't think I'll do that as eloquently as Joe. So maybe if anyone has any suggestions at the end, that would be really helpful, because I'm quite in the thick of making certainly these second 2 projects at the moment. I haven't thought that much about them theoretically yet. Fanshen, we make unforgettable creative interventions which are participatory, playful and political. We describe ourselves as a recovering theatre company who now design and create audience-centric experiences which involve elements of performance, game and installation. We take big complex subjects and synthesize them into embodied experiences. And we're interested in art as a liminal place within which risk can be taken, in polyphonic experiences and in bringing groups together in ways that challenge the idea that life and other people are frightening. We want generosity, intellectual rigour and radical alternatives. We're based in Newcastle. We've been making work since 2007. The company is co-led by me and Rachel Briscoe, and she's the talented one, but I'm speaking on her behalf today. A lot of our work uses technology in some way. We quite liked for a while a term that Coney used, which is playable theatre. And a lot of what technology has enabled us to do is create, some of our work doesn't involve any live performers, which is something we're really interested in. We had a recent experience where we were pitching a project and one of the judges got very hung up on the fact that this show would last over 3 weeks being played on your phone. I'm talking about that project in a bit. And because he said he got bored during Hamlet, he didn't think he would last 3 weeks. So we now put the X, the next day we put that X into our Twitter handle and have started to talk about ourselves as a recovering theatre company. So I'm going to talk about the first of the 3 projects, List for the End of the World. It was performed at Live Theatre Newcastle, Arts Stockton, and there's other places, some Horn in Edinburgh during the Edinburgh Fringe. And the show consists entirely of crowdsourced lists. So the way we gathered these was that we put a new list title on social media every day and invited people to respond, mainly using Facebook and Twitter. And that's how we generated material for the show. So these are some example list titles. And this is an example of the photos that we would use to accompany the requests on social media. And we did loads of these every day over a long time. We also gathered them, as well as social media, we also gathered them from workshops. We had post boxes in venues where there were list cards that people could fill in and post in. And we also, every day during rehearsals, we also filled in the lists ourselves. The majority of the content used in the show did come from social media, though, and the show was written by around 300 people. And I guess that kind of begs the question, if 300 people wrote it, what was our role as artists in all this? So I think one of the things we sort of really think about in our work is that we create a frame in which people are able to play, and part of that frame in this case was that we came up with the titles for the lists, which prompted the responses, and also we created the dramaturgy of how to present them and the order in which they were presented. So yeah, that's some of the ways I think we kind of co-created that with them. I'm going to show you some little snippets of video of the piece. This features Claire Dunn, who's the one with the curly hair, who trained here, taught here, and has performed many times in this room. So I'm quite happy that she's back digitally.
Yeah, we're happy
today.
she's back.
This is the beginning. I'll show you some bits.
Things, biscuits, lists,
See,
a show, art, fully clothed,
other people's real stuff.
planned but new each time,
Hopefully funny, maybe with sometimes.
Performed by us.
actors,
Crowdsourced, not crowdfunded.
Quiet,
loud,
At times musically accompanied.
fast,
slow,
Kind of dependent on being able to read people's handwriting.
written by over 300 people.
yours,
Ours.
56 minutes long. Things I want to do before I die. Sail out of Auckland Harbour. Adopt a dog or several. Live in another country.
things I want to do before I die, see a long-eared owl, visit Finland, make a pearly queen costume.
And then I'm just going to skip ahead to another section just to give you some senses of different ways in which they were presented.
Eggs at bread.
To me, actually almost everyone.
Choices I made. Unnecessary eggs at breakfast. To say yes to something that scared me. To stop smoking in brackets but started again. To spend £4 on a sausage roll. To end my marriage goal. Dye my hair blue, now it won't wash out. Pay thousands of pounds for a uni course. Glasses, not contacts, girls, not guys. To throw myself down the stairs drunk. What to name my pets? To eat venison despite being a vegetarian. To exclude someone irrelevant from my life. Spending all my student loan on makeup and food. To not become what my parents wanted me to be. To leave later than I should have. My friends, my phone, my shoes, my socks. To get my tongue pierced. To stop taking antidepressants. To stop caring that people make assumptions about my sexuality because of my haircut. To not have Botox yet.
so we had a number of songs, quite a lot of music in the show, and one of the rules with the music is that we had a list which was songs I've kissed people to, and all of the music or songs had to be songs people had told us they'd kissed people to, so that was a restriction. And then I'll just show you one final bit, just to show you a sort of where it got a bit darker as well.
But we haven't got any here.
Questions I'm afraid to ask my parents about getting contraception. Do you regret calling off the divorce? Are you telling the truth when you say you're fine? Do you regret having me so late? Were you lying when ... What would you have me do different? Are you scared of dying? Was I adopted? Why don't we speak to Grandma anymore? I still don't know the answer to that one. About getting contraception.
Questions I'm afraid to ask my parents. Who is my dad? Still unanswered. My parents got married really quickly, only 4 months after they first met. I once asked my mum, would you have got married so fast if you had just lost your dad? I got a frosty response. I still don't know the answer, but it seemed to work out well between my parents. Are you having an affair? I'm afraid to ask my mom.
And then this is the final list.
I could have made things be different. Things I want to do before I die. Speak French confidently, though I settle for competently. Relearn how to play the piano. Visit India. See my children grow up. Get better at cooking steak. Watch someone else die. Watch someone else give birth. Watch cricket in the Caribbean. Feel ready to go.
Cool. So yeah, that's just some little snippets. It's hard to sort of give you a sense of it, but hopefully that gives a little feeling for that piece. And I guess one of the things that we were kind of interested in is that it sort of turned out that people found that the process of contributing lists wasn't just the process, it was also part of the artwork in itself. And sorry, it's the wrong slide. And here are a couple of quotes from people. Some people would contribute every single day over a long period of time. And here's a couple of quotes from people who did that. Now, obviously, that's what we felt about it and how we'd like it to feel. I am kind of aware that you could also critique it in another way and say that it was a form of unpaid labour. So I guess there's two ways of looking at that same thing. Coney, again, talked about the idea of the nose and the tail. So how do you lead into a show and lead out of it, and how can you extend that experience? And one thing that we did was in the queue as people went in, they did a list of toys I remember loving as a child, and then they were used in the performance itself. And then at the end, they got a little matchbox with a list item of things I want to do before I die. And there was the option of tweeting those. So a few people then also tweeted it. So it kind of ends as well as beginning on social media in a way. Cool. Second project I'm going to talk about a bit more briefly is Elvita Adams is Coming Home. It's a piece that we're currently developing with these venues in the Northeast. Has anyone heard of Elvita Adams, out of interest? So she, in 1979, in December 1979, she jumped off the 86th floor of the Empire State Building on her birthday, and she was blown back in on the floor below and went to hospital with a broken hip. And then she disappears from history completely. So we, in the show, we decided to try and think what her life might have become afterwards. And in the show, we tell 3 different possibilities of what that life might have been. And I guess it kind of links to List for the End of the World in a way, in that quite a lot of our work is about life and death, and what do we choose, why do we choose to be alive, or why do we choose not to be alive, I guess. Although they're often funnier than that sounds. There's 3, so the show has 3 different versions of her life. Each version is told through a different type of media. So the one story is told mainly through film and video archives, in which she appears very fleetingly in the corner of frames. Another one is told through animation and is much more fantastical. And the final one is told through popular media. It starts in gossip magazines, National Enquirer, really trashy kind of magazines, and then it ends in kind of social media. So it's the final bits are told through Twitter, Instagram, and finally YouTube. It's not the main theme of the piece. Social media isn't the main theme of the piece, but we did a recent sharing, and an audience member wrote that the piece made them think about, and this really resonates, I think, with the Dante or Die show, perhaps, about what traces we leave behind digitally, and what we can and can't piece together from the evidence that remains of a person. So in this part of the story, her life is mainly glimpsed through the Twitter and Instagram of her son, because she's actually fled to a ranch in California to escape her fame. And but he is quite fame hungry and tweets various bits of evidence of her. So he starts tweeting, and we sort of display this. He starts tweeting coffee cups with her lipstick on, the glasses that she never wears in public. She wears contacts, and finally some cranberry tablets she's taking. And then on social media, various people kick off at him, and he tweets an apology about that. And so these all, we're sort of not quite seeing her, just seeing her through him at all these points. And then he goes to prison, which is a long story, but it involves Lindsay Lohan. And he comes out, he's learned to cook, so he starts a healthy eating Instagram. And then there's this picture that he tweets, and someone asks him where, because he said he's prepared it for his mom, where his mom is, and suggests that they do a cooking video together. And the very end of the show, we finally meet her, and him and her do a cooking tutorial together on YouTube, which is our sort of attempt to, finally we get to meet her properly at the end of the show. That's where that piece is sort of at the moment. And the final piece I wanted to tell you about is also currently in development. It's called Looking for Love. We don't have an image for it yet, so I found that one. We're currently developing it with these venues. In a couple of weeks, we're going to spend a week on it in Hartlepool. It's a collaboration between me and Rachel and computational artist Joe McAllister. Starting point for the show was Pam Briggs from Northumbria University's psychology department, who is studying online romance scams and how they've sort of developed in the digital age. And she told us about this and then sent us some of her articles, and we got really interested in this as a topic. So we decided to make this piece in which you kind of play at being romance scammed knowingly. We're also really interested in the meeting point between humans and machines. I thought that phrase about prosthetics earlier was really interesting. So it is in a way very connected, but in a way it's a slightly clunky thing. And can machines really understand love? So in the thing, there will be an AI that is trying to make you fall in love with it, basically. and we're very interested in the level of personalization that algorithms can provide. So it scrapes you and your data on Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of other things to try and create what it thinks is your ideal, which is probably a very close reflection of yourself. And we'll see if it works. So the draft structure of it at the moment is it's played over 3 weeks on your phone, and it culminates in an AR experience in the cafe at the venue. And again, I was interested in that resonance about cafes with Dante Will Die. It starts kind of like Tinder, but it's done through the form of cartoons. So is it possible to turn off the camera for a moment?
Yeah.
Is that all right? So let's just go back to the slides. Cool. Yeah, so starts. Yeah, and then in between, so there's these set piece interactions, and then in between there's a chatbot which will hopefully talk to you and convince you it's a human. We'll see how that goes, but we're quite interested and optimistic about that. I'm just going to touch really briefly on some sort of ideas that I'm interested in around this piece. One is this kind of new possibility of personalized theatre, and I think that's a new thing that's enabled by technology and social media. So although everyone gets sent a song and a poem and so on, everyone will get a song and a poem that's very personally tailored to them. And the job that the person will do will be the sort of job that it thinks you might like, and so on and so on. So there's a kind of an element of personalization, which is interesting. I think I wonder if when people are playing with it, they'll start to try and mess it up. So we'll start to try and pretend they're a big fan of Donald Trump because it's trying to echo your politics as well, or whatever. So will people try and mess with it or not? I'm quite curious about that. And I wonder if there are also some kind of analogies to the way we think about one-on-one performance, because this is in a way a kind of an intimate one-on-one performance, except from it's with you and your phone. I'm interested in maybe there's a new sense of the prosumer in this, in the sense that we are producing the artwork as well as consuming it at the same time, and that it's produced from the data that we've generated. And in this way, even when we think we're having fun, we're actually making money for people who are taking our data and using it and turning it into cash. Final thing I wanted to sort of mention is I'm quite interested in a kind of a productive discomfort. And I felt in a number of conversations with different people that there's a difference in how we think of interactive and immersive theatre versus traditional theatre in terms of how much discomfort we will tolerate. And I also organised a symposium on care, and I'm a great believer in care and hospitality for audiences. And I'm going to I'm sure lots of you are, to the Punch Drunk event on Monday about taking care of our audiences and making sure they don't get harmed and so on. So I think that's all really important, but I also think art can really usefully discomfort us. And my favourite films are Ingmar Bergman films, even though I can't bear them because they make me so uncomfortable. They also have a really profound effect on me, and Oedipus is incredibly uncomfortable. Ibsen is very uncomfortable. I feel like we let these great classic plays be uncomfortable, and then when it's interactive and immersive, we're a bit more scared of that, and Looking for Love at points becomes uncomfortable because of what it's telling us about some of the dangers around our data. But I think, for me personally, I think that's quite interesting. There's some analogies for me to how Alston talks about the politics and aesthetics of frustration within Shunt's work. It's different, but it's I think there's a kind of a connected idea around that discomfort can be aesthetically valuable. And I also really have a kind of a desire to honestly reflect the world as we see it, combined with a lot of care and a lot of hospitality. And how can you make sure you care for people in every possible way apart from the very moments in the artwork where you want it to be uncomfortable for artistic reasons. Thank you very much for listening. That's my contact details. I saw this meme this morning and wanted to share it with you. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for a rich presentation and for showing us some of your future projects. That was very exciting. If I can now ask Joe to join us at the table, we can ask if you want to Dan. We can open it up to any questions. We have about 10, 12 minutes, so would anybody like to start? In true conference fashion, I'll start with a question. I really did thoroughly enjoy what you've just shown us, and I was thinking of the notion, especially when you mentioned Deleuze, of a rhizomatic kind of approach or process, something that's like a collage aesthetic to your work, where it's not just dealing with different mediums, but it's also dealing with us wandering both internally and in nature or in different types of performance spaces. So could you add a little to those meandering thoughts themselves?
Yeah, I suppose obviously there is something that kind of resonates with the notion of the rhizome and networked connectivity in the ways in which things may not be kind of centralised but have kind of ways in which they intersect with each other. And I guess the thing for me that I found problematic in those kinds of connections has been how to take digital technologies into those kinds of spaces, and then also how to bring elements of those spaces out using digital technologies and find something that works as a connection. And I don't think I've kind of really got there yet. To kind of give a little bit more context, what I'm also aiming to do with this project is to create some kind of walking experiences that will use digital technologies, but audio and video in the context of those kinds of spaces. And there are lots of problems with that, because as soon as you get somebody into a space with a phone, then they're engaging with the phone, and you have to try and kind of bring them out of that space and into a space that is the one that you want them to engage with. So what's the point of this then? What is the kind of the value of bringing these kinds of technologies into those kind of spaces and making those connections? So I'm kind of coming up against those types of questions in terms of my collages or mixes.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure how connected it is, but a real sort of important starting point for us in looking for love is just the most human thing possibly we would say is love, and whether a machine can make you fall in love with it. So that kind of disjuncture, or is it possible, those kind of connections. And I think there's also a kind of a moment of disjuncture we're a bit worried about in that show, where the transition from the phone, the sort of chatting and sharing experience on the phone to the AR experience, you're still on your phone, but in the cultural venue, in the cafe. And I want that to be a sort of helpful jolt rather than a weird jolt. Yeah.
Thank you. Good.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. They were really interesting presentations, fascinating work from both of you. One of the things that interested me, I was thinking, first of all, Joe, when I was watching yours, was about whether you ever shared wild spaces with other people. And you talk about Robert Macfarlane a lot, and his work is always on his own, or at least the stuff I've read has always been about him on his own in the spaces that he's in. And I was wondering about whether you ever shared those spaces with other people, or whether it was to do with your own experience on your own.
Well, what's really interesting? Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was then going to say that actually that was in a way picked up by what Dan was saying. First you were talking, Dan, about whether these were one-to-one or just on your own with the phone. And it's something that we've been talking about in relation to the Use Not Found project, that you are kind of on your own, alone together, I think, is one of the lines in the performance. So I just wondered a little bit if you could talk about that idea of alone and togetherness.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting question for me, because one of the issues with the kind of walks that I want people to go on is that people are quite scared of being in these spaces. They're very, there's a lot of theorising around this, but they're basically quite ambivalent spaces. Woodlands in urban environments can often be places that people are quite intimidated by, and have a lot of kind of behaviour happening in there that is there because it's not kind of regulated and managed in the same kind of way, which is really good on one part. So actually, I go in there a lot on my own to combat those kinds of fears and to try and have an experience which is part of it is that kind of fear and slight trepidation, but is also just something about being alone in that kind of space. But on the other hand, the work that I'm developing, I think, is going to have to be for two people to go into that space together and have some kind of experience which will be in relation to the space, but also in relation to each other, because I think that's the only way I can see that working for other people to experience that kind of space and to open it up and make it accessible to as many people as I can. So it's actually core question for me is that notion of aloneness and an encounter with a wild space, but also then some of the kind of real practical issues and people have had things nicked and been mugged and all sorts in those kind of in that space. So there are kind of real health and safety things that I have to think about as well.
Yeah, I think it's very, very interesting with phones. They let us be very, very intimate and in solitude at the same time. And I have a friend who does a lot of online dating in quite in a variety of ways, and takes quite a lot of risks in that world. But one thing she talks about is that from the comfort of her home, surrounded by her own things, in that physically safe environment, she can take more emotional risks than she could do in a public space. So I think that's kind of interesting. And one thing that we were actually talking with Annabelle at Art Stockton about just the other day about Looking for Love is we feel like there needs to be a time when the audience are able to talk to each other, because again, it's another Coney idea of the bar, but in a thing where people have quite an intense experience and often slightly different experiences from each other, there's a great desire to talk about it and share experiences. So we think we're going to try and have the AR bit sort of a number of people at a time around the cafe or at slightly staggered times, and then a kind of a group debrief, which might also make the whole experience even safer as well, hopefully, and allow people to debrief about any moments of vulnerability or challenge or anything. But that there will be a kind of a moment of togetherness, because that's been important in a lot of our other kind of interactive or more immersive pieces, to create those spaces. Another of our pieces, the Justice Syndicate, it's a collaboration with a neuroscientist, but we have a really structured debrief in which we talk about the group psychology of what just happened.
Yes, please, back.
One question for Joe. Joe, I'm following your work many years now. You're doing fantastic work.
Nice to see you.
It's so beautiful. It's very, very interesting, this question of linking brightness and digitality, because it's supposed to be completely opposite things in our conscience. And to find the quiet place to bring them together as an artist. And obviously, I have realized from your presentation that the vocabulary that we are sharing, describing those two fields is common.
Yeah.
So it's maybe something is there in terms of relationship. And I was wondering, in terms of effect, do you think that we can also use for these concepts classical concepts of beauty or sublime? You know, this idea came when I saw the psychedelic patterns that I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, because whenever you look at theories around wildness, you end up at the sublime. You always do, because that's kind of where it takes you. It takes you back to Kant and your other man, I can't remember his name. Sorry? Look. Thank you very much. There we go. And so there is something that is rarefied often about that encounter, and actually Sublime is supposed to be kind of, I suppose, a sense of fear and awe, as well as a kind of an engagement with beauty as well. So that's quite interesting as well, I think, because that concept of the duality of that experience, when I'm in that kind of space that I've just described, where there is a little bit of trepidation and fear, but also there's a real engagement. Equally, the kind of looking at the grand mountain away there, and then also there's something about digital spaces as well, which I think have something of that. So I see no reason why some of those concepts can't be really usefully put into conversation. And I hadn't thought about this until I'd started to look at the wildness of the natural world, and then thought, well, yeah, you're right, that vocabulary is the kind of vocabulary I would use when I think about digital practices and the ways in which I think and feel about them. So yeah, I think that seems to me to be something that is emergent for me, and I agree that those kind of, as you described them, kind of more classical concepts can also have some relevance here as well, possibly, yeah.
Just interesting that Coleridge, the organic and mechanic, that feeds right into what you're saying.
It does, yeah.
Was there a question just here?
Yes, just a very basic one. Thank you. Thank you to Ms. Beak. We heard from John Today, I think it was Luke, doing the competition.
That's right, from Mamela. Yeah.
And he was saying that his technology has to sort of be there for that sort of dominating. I was just wondering if anyone's ever come up to you after a performance or when you've spoken and asked you specifically how the tech was done, if audiences are interested in that.
Yeah, with Invisible Treasure, we had a variety, and so some sort of classes of computational artists who were really like, that's that, you know, they were completely clocking all the time. Most people know the box that the audience were in Invisible Treasure, there's stuff about it on our website, but was designed to be like one of these things where it's all smooth and shiny and you don't know how it's working. That was where the audience spent almost the entire show, and then at the end they exited through the giant rabbit and saw all the outside walls of the space and saw all the wires and saw Sam at his desk of computers, and so we're kind of revealing all the mechanics of what had been done, and then a number of people would spend quite a long time chatting to the stage manager at the end about how different things had worked and how different audiences had responded to the same stimuli, and so on. And it was slightly crazy, but we paid a cellist to play Bach every night during that time, so it could be a really reflective space. And there was the opportunity to write on the outside walls prompts to the responses to the different questions that the show raised, and that space for reflection felt really important. And some people were very curious in the mechanics of the technology, and I think it was important to talk about that. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think any of the work I make is anywhere near as technologically advanced as either what Dan does with Fanchen or what Dante or Dai are doing, but certainly when I was doing my PhD, I had an interest in revealing technical processes through asking people to be present behind me when I was mixing, to be involved in that. Lisa's done a little bit of that when I've done projects. And it was very various, the response to that. Some people were really engaged in that, but the majority of people were more interested in the experience that was created by the technology rather than, they're quite happy to kind of have a look at it, but not necessarily. I was surprised by the lack of interest, let's say, in that context, which maybe is quite understandable really in some ways. But yeah, it's certainly not a kind of a universal, ooh, how does it work kind of response, I don't think, that I've had anyway.
I think we have time for a final question from the audience. Yes.
It's a question to Joe, and bear with me, I haven't quite thought this through. So many interesting things going on in my life. I guess what I was wondering is if you could just tell us a little bit more about your role. So interesting to think about the sublime as being all of these processes that are beyond human understanding and comprehension. And I think it's really interesting to think of, this complex system of the wildscape the complex system of the digital as being simply now beyond human capacity to understand, you know, and then we touched on kind of post-digital idea that Barry talks about, that it's so embedded, it's so huge, we actually can't imagine it anymore, it's beyond what we can imagine. But when I look at your work, it feels really human to me, really human, and so I guess I wondered if you could talk about your role and how you see yourself as translating these ginormous concepts for a viewer, or making sense of them in some way, and just talk a little bit about what you see yourself as doing in relation to those ideas.
Yeah, I'll try. So I guess that in terms of thinking through the role that I've played, which has been various in terms of different projects, that's to be clear, like, so sometimes I will be a performer, a facilitator, a participant or whatever. But in terms of the work in relation to the space and the technology, I definitely don't see it as translating at all, or I can't conceive of it in that way. The way that I talked about it, and which is more comfortable for me, and that's doesn't necessarily mean it's right, it's just more comfortable, is to think about a sampling of an environment. So taking sections and snippets and moments and bits that are never the complete thing, but are little kind of shards and fragments of a thing, and then trying to bring them together in a way that makes something happen specifically for me. And I don't think I can think beyond that when I'm within a mixing kind of process. So it's like, oh, that's making something happen, or that's unusual, or that's interesting. And then when it goes into a space of like today, or in other spaces where I'm sharing it, I'm just kind of like, I don't know, you know, I don't really know what is happening in terms of how it's coming across, because I'm very aware of the kind of failure of it, I think, in lots of ways, and in a good way, I think, you know, because I don't think, and I don't think I should be trying to, but equally you can't help but think, well, that's just not the thing, is it? It's not what I was wanting to do, and therefore, but so it's a very personal, I'm very bad at kind of sharing in lots of ways, and so it becomes quite kind of circular and cyclical, like the loop, you know, in terms of it coming back, and then I'm refiguring into it. But just briefly, I think that is always in conversation with that sense of a precipice, because I am kind of bewildered by the options of software, I'm bewildered by apps, I'm bewildered by the possibilities of things. I could do with a creative technologist, but I don't really know what I would ask them to do. And I'm kind of I have that sense of not really knowing how to navigate that in the same way I don't really know how to navigate all samples of space. So there is, if there is a kind of role, it's somebody who tries to sample something and mix it together in ways that make me feel things, but it doesn't necessarily then, I think, I haven't got a sense then of how that might kind of manifest, I suppose. And it obviously manifests in different ways, clearly, again, according to the environment. It was interesting thinking about when you talked about somebody in their home being able to kind of engage in more risky behaviour. That's really fascinating, I think, and I immediately kind of wrote that down, because that makes me think about how you place things and then how the place is impacting upon the experience. But equally, I was wondering what would happen when something really difficult happened, and then does that shift your space? Does something happen to you? Because the unheimlich thing, you know, the kind of uncanny way when something that's very familiar to you is made somehow strange or uncomfortable, is also something which is... anyway, I don't know how I got there, but...
Something we didn't make was that, and one thing we didn't show to Bryony in this, when we did the pitch, was we found pictures of every room in her house, which are from the estate agent's website. And one idea that we came up with that we're not going to make, but you can find on Google Street View where people live, and you could stage a burglary or an arson attack filmed of people's houses and show it to them. And I'm not going to do that because it's not very nice. But that's perfectly possible to do with quite simple technology. Really practical tip, if you follow your bank on Twitter, follow lots of other banks as well, because it's such a giveaway.
On that useful note, could you please join me in thanking our speakers, Joe and Dan? there'll be coffee and biscuits just outside, so please help yourself. And we're running slightly late, again true to conference fashion, so perhaps in about 10 to 15 minutes, if we could all come back in here for our panel discussion, that would be great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm not going to say much, but I'm just delighted to that we've managed to get together this wonderful panel of people. I'm not going to introduce them, but I am briefly going to introduce Dr. Irini Nedelkopoulou. I'm delighted that she's back with us for the afternoon and the evening. And Irini is, I was looking for her, oh, there she is, at York St John University, and she's the author of, or co-editor of Performance and Phenomenology, Traditions and Transformations, and she's also co-edited, that's right, isn't it, the Contemporary Theatre Review, Performance Research and International Journal of Performance Arts and Digital Media, and she's done other kinds of editing as well. But we're delighted to see her here, and we're very pleased that she could run this session for us.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm really thrilled to be in such a good company with four very interesting people that I know you by name and I've read about you. So I'm really pleased to be here and chairing this panel. I'm trying not to say too many things, and I'll just jump into introducing them. So Lawrence Hill is the director of Brighton Digital Festival, an annual month-long exploration of digital culture, as well as an independent creative producer and curator. And he's particularly interested in digital art and activisms that explore the socio-political and cultural implications of digital technologies. He also curates a fantastic conference as part of the Brighton Digital Festival, amongst other things, which is called Messy Edge. And that conference actually challenges dominant perspectives and explores the edges of the digital substrate that is shaping our lives. Jack Lowe, it kind of feels inappropriate that I started with all the men, but it wasn't intentional. It's not how I copied and pasted your names. Okay, so Jack Lowe is the director of Curious Directive, and who make layered, emotionally charged, science-led theatre operating from Norwich. They forge relationships with science communities, theatre audiences, and technology partners in pursuit of new ways to tell stories. And then Janet Vaughan is the co-artistic director of Talking Birds, whose 25-year practice explores the complex relationships between people and the place. And the company is well known for its site-specific theatre of plays, its interactive works, its pioneering mobile captioning tool, the Difference Engine, and smaller sociable events. And then last but not least, Sophie Gunn, who has spent a major part of her life on stage, and for the best part of it, she shared that stage with interpreters, as her parents are both deaf. So after experiencing the lack of access for deaf people in theatre, she decided to put all her education into practice by using the sign language skills as a career and starting up as a BSL advisor in theatre. And since 2016, she has worked with Dante or Die as an Access associate. So thank you very much for being here and welcome. I would like to start by asking you to actually talk a bit about your own practice, but also how you're thinking about artistic practice in relation to technology. So, if you'd like to say some things about that.
Would like to go first if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've been working with Dante or Die on User Not Found, looking at integrating captioning into the, I don't want to give away too much about the show, but into the performance on the phones. And it's slightly different than just having captioning, just standard captioning on a phone, because it's integrated within the performance, because obviously a lot of the performance is heavily on the phone. So it's been really interesting, and I've been working with Marmello, who are amazing. They're like so clever, and I've just sort of been telling them what I want, and they've been doing it, which is amazing. And I think it was an important decision for us to use captioning, because it's a one-man show, and we wanted to keep that that intimacy in the performance. We didn't want to detract from that, and because everything's on the phone, it seemed strange to have a third point of focus if you had the actor, the phone, and an interpreter. So that's why we decided to use captioning. And as Terry said before, tonight is the second audience we've ever shown it to, and there will be some deaf people there, so I'm really looking forward to the captions.
What was the question again?
I mean, how, I forgot even the question.
Okay.
I mean, if you can talk about the way you're thinking artistic practice,
Okay,
especially in relation to technology.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, fundamentally, I'm not that interested in technology. I mean, I am. I use it.
You have to be. You're the director of
I know,
Brighton
right?
Festival.
I feel weird saying that. Probably shouldn't have filmed it. But for kind of artistic work, I like it when it disappears. I like it when the technology kind of slides into the background a little bit. And I like it when it kind of enables participation in a meaningful way. I feel like a lot of participation feels like if the audience walks into a room, something will happen, and that doesn't feel like particularly interactive to me. I'll give you an example of a piece of work that we've just commissioned. I commissioned a company called Umbrellium 2 years ago to make a piece for us this year. They're an architecture and design agency, and they specialise in kind of participative projects. So we're doing a project with them called Voice Over Brighton, which essentially means that if you're a participant in the project, you get a box that sits in your home and has a big button on it that says press to record. And when you press that button, you record something, it gets uploaded to a server. That's the tech, basically, that's it. What you do with it beyond that is what's the interesting thing in the project for me. So for that project, we're working with the trans community in the city. Brighton has a huge trans population. It's kind of the highest per capita in the country. And they cross kind of all socio-economic groups or classes or races. And I was really interested in how you can use technology to bring together a kind of disparate but shared community. So I think that's what's really important to me. It's important to me that kind of digital artwork does something meaningful, I guess. And there's lots of it that is very spectacular, and there's nothing wrong with spectacle. Spectacle is good, but for me, what I'm interested in commissioning is the stuff that has some kind of purpose and meaning behind it.
Well, I suppose sort of widening that slightly, I think with all our work, we're seeking to make work which allows people to make new connections, whether that's with the place that they are or with the people around them, and quite like giving people an excuse to talk to each other and talk to people that they might not usually get a chance to speak to get a sort of different point of view. And it's important for us that this kind of work involves anyone and everyone, I suppose. Because society, of course, is kind of richer when everybody is involved. In terms of technology and our sort of work with that, I suppose technology's been a tool in the armoury for a number of years, like anything else is really. A real hands-on thing, a thing to play with, I suppose. and we've incorporated quite a lot of different kinds of technology over the years in all our different kinds of work, whether that is a bit more down the spectacle or as much of a spectacle as a small-scale, low-budget theatre company can be, where you use a load of CAD projectors and make the set appear to turn into a wall of death in front of the audience, feel like it's actually moving. Or whether you whether we're delivering works to people's pockets, phones, or crowdsourcing theories about the world, which we did with a particular project before social media was invented, and it would have been so much easier to do it now. So yeah, I suppose lots of things in between, but I suppose the reason that I've been invited to sit on this panel is really to do with our with the Difference Engine, which is we've kind of spent the last 10 years really developing the Difference Engine as a system to deliver captioning and audio description and much more to audiences' mobile devices, and I suppose that the whole reason that came about was because we had an early brush during our site-specific work, a piece of site-specific work about 15 years ago. We had a sort of really inspiring brush with a local authority access officer who was really brilliant at getting us to think differently about accessibility, and because we were making a show in a 14th century monastery which didn't have, or had a broken lift, and obviously didn't have the budget to fix it. So we started to think about, well, how can you make a space like that and a show like that accessible and all that sort of stuff. So in a way, I suppose that caused us to think, well, could we put accessibility at the heart of the work, make it, start from a point of access. And then smartphones were invented, so that was quite handy, because we suddenly thought, oh, God, right, that's a way of doing that. So yeah, for about 10 years, we've been sort of developing a way of doing this via smartphones. So the important thing for us about developing it and working with the technology is that it's to allow sort of small scale and experimental work to be opened out to audiences that don't traditionally get to see it, because it's way too expensive for small scale companies to use any of the conventional access solutions, really. And they're not always appropriate for some of the work that experimental companies are making. So, you can get a big captioning box, but if you put it in if you're doing a promenade show, you can't really carry it round. So we were trying to get over all of those sorts of things. So I wanted to make something that was affordable for us and for other companies, that could always be on, because again, particularly deaf audiences, for captioned shows, there'll be 1 or 2 shows in a run that are captioned. So I wanted that thing of like, well, maybe you could choose which show out of the run to go to, rather than only being able to go to the one on Tuesday. And we kind of thought that perhaps if there were more people within the small-scale experimental sector making shows routinely accessible, that would help to do a lot of audience development, really. However they're making it accessible, it would just help in terms of audience development. So a lot of the stuff we do is also outdoor and doesn't rely on any technology at all. So we've had to adapt our technology to work outdoors when so you can also caption shows when you're walking around or doing something at a festival, which is obviously useful in terms of voices carrying as well as people who specifically need the technology. So yeah, that was a bit more than answering the question probably, but yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, I guess two things to... Hello everyone, hello. 2 things to mention, I suppose. The first was a show that we made that opened last year called Frogman was a live action theatre piece where audiences also wore VR headsets, 30 of them, now 60 of them, and it presented a really interesting solution actually to what you were just saying about captioning and interpretation. And so VR headsets, they're just loaded up with it now, and so if someone needs it, then that's how it works for us. And interesting challenges at the moment with it being translated into Mandarin, and how you know, with a small theatre company, you go about working that out in VR. And the other thing I'd say about I guess the practice of this side of our work is that one of the things I felt very strongly about when we started talking with software developers to develop the app for the show was that we wanted to make sure we democratized all of it, the whole process of working with Live Action 360 in VR headsets, and so that's what's interesting me at the moment is for small companies, how can you kind of for people who are the creative voices and creative ideas people behind those companies, how can you encourage and share that actually, you know, these days compared to 25 years ago, you can just watch YouTube tutorials and follow the instructions on a Samsung dual lens camera to make a VR show. I think there's a big bit of mythology that spreads like an infectious disease through the theatre world that you need to be the RSC to be working with these sorts of shows. And it terrifies young theatre makers, and it annoys me beyond all belief. And I think it should be crushed. There we are. Some strong verbs. Sorry, anyone from those big organisations have their place for the use of that technology, but it's nonsense that you need to be a massive organisation to make a mocap show. Absolute nonsense. And so yeah, just off the back of Frogman, we tried in our own small way to kind of do a call out and who wants to come and learn what we learned, the mistakes we made, and we did that, and people were a bit surprised that we were sort of saying just come and look at all the rehearsal notes. But what's so funny about that is following that up, of course, the interpretation, like academia, the interpretation that people take from how you did it is always going to be something completely different anyway. So yeah, that's where we're at with technology.
Okay, great. I want to kind of return to something that in one way or another you all touched upon, which is access and accessibility. And that from different perspectives, from the perspective of the audience member, the perspective of the artist, perhaps the curator, wider audiences. And I'll try to do that in twos, the issue of accessibility, very heavily gender again twos. I'm sorry, but that's how it kind of works in my head, not the gender thing. The that's what we do in Greece, very, very simplified. Anyway, so in terms of access and accessibility, I was very interested reading about Talking Birds, but also reading about your response, Sophie, to Dante or Die and how you work with them. And something that actually was foregrounded was this idea of discrete technology, to make something accessible which actually has this dimension of being either invisible or discrete. And I was just wondering if there is some sort of tension, if we think that we really try to make, and also disabled artists have been very vocal about being visible as they are, and not to try and hide the invisibility. So I think it's very interesting to talk about a discrete technology which actually hides and doesn't distinguish audience members who are deaf or blind or have different kind of disability, with the fact that disabled artists and audiences preferably would like to be very, very visible. So I was just wondering about this tension, how you feel or what you think about that.
I think that's interesting actually, because I think we've used discrete to talk about it, not in terms of so that you don't see it, like in that sort of sense, but in the sense of if you're in a performance and people have got their phones out, that's distracting, and there's a sort of still a kind of thing that's like, well, you shouldn't have your phone out in the theatre, are you on Facebook kind of thing or whatever. And so I think it was more about that. It was like, you've got your phone out, but it's not, you're not going to get, it's that sort of discreet rather than kind of, hide it away. So I think, of course it's both, but...
Yeah, I think it's about allowing a deaf audience to be able to go to, like you said, anything they want to go to, and empowering them in that way. And what you said is so true about deaf and disabled artists empowering their audience by their performance. Whereas if the performance isn't centered around being deaf or disabled, then I agree. It's not the discreteness of the accessibility. It's the discreteness of being. It's something I remember my mum we used to print off all the scripts, and she used to get really annoyed at having to like flip through them. And then when like smartphones became a big thing, I'd send her all of them on her phone, and she'd sit and read the script as it went, and somebody got really, really cross with her about it. So it resonates really well, actually, that you spoke about the difference engine, and about, same with Dante, about having it all integrated. It's kind of the beauty of this performance, actually. It means that everyone's on their phone, so you don't feel like you're on your phone during a play, which is traditionally the worst thing you can do. So that's really interesting, I think.
Yeah, so it has to do more with the fact that the easy access whenever they want, rather than you know, kind of not being feasible. Okay, thank you. Lawrence and Jack, I was just wondering, again, on the issue of accessibility, the way that you talk about the technology you use, Jack, this idea of using cutting edge technology together with theatre and some sort of kind of also scientific knowledge, but this idea of cutting edge, while Lawrence, in the way you talk about technology, specifically when you introduced the messy edge, it was exactly perhaps the other side, an antithesis to cutting edge. And I suppose both of these concepts of ways of talking about technology has to do with accessibility, how audiences access the work, but also how certain artists get access or perhaps hack technology, so they're allowed to use technology while being at the margins, perhaps as activists or under different capacities. So I was just wondering about this kind of equation between cutting edge, messy edge, and accessibility. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, the Messy Edge is a conference that I programmed last year. Was the first one, actually. The Messy Edge kind of came from thinking about the stuff that happens at the edges of things. And we always talk about the cutting edge and the bleeding edge, and these are to me, very clinical terms. And the idea of the messy edge was like, there's this stuff kind of happening at the edges where people are toying around with ideas and activisms, and it's not necessarily shiny and clean and necessarily even particularly well thought out, but it is, to me, you know, where the interesting stuff happens, and it is non-clinical, it's non-binary. It's all those things that I think are really interesting. And that I've been to very lucky. I've been to lots of digital conferences, and they're always like 99.9% white men. So my curation of the Messy Edge kind of started from the point that I really wanted it to be more diverse than that, and it kind of ended up where I was the only white man on the day. You know, on the stage, not in the audience, and that was it was kind of extraordinary, really. And in terms of accessibility, for me, that's a really crucial thing. And so it's you know, it took place at University of Sussex, but it's a completely non-academic conference. It's open to everybody. It's very cheap. It's like 20 quid, and we give most of the tickets away anyway. And it's about people seeing themselves kind of represented, and that sort of accessibility, and people being able to say, you know, there are these artists and activists that are making work in South Africa about digital colonialism, which is a really interesting subject. And nobody's really talking about it very much. So being able to bring somebody to kind of look at that as a subject, who's an artist and an activist, was really interesting. And there's a kind of accessibility there as well around making that available to everybody, and saying it's not academic, but there are certainly academics there. There are students there. There are people from businesses there. You know, Brighton has a massive digital cluster. So, you know, bringing people who are making apps and making VR products and doing all these things, and saying, these are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about when you're building your apps. It's not just about making money. It is that for lots of them. But, you know, you have to think about how you're shaping this, as I said in the intro, the kind of digital substrate that is shaping all of our lives is being made by somebody. And we have to ask those questions about why they're making it and who they're making it for and who has access to it, who sees themselves represented in it. So all of those questions are for me what the Messy Edge is about.
So formally, the type of I don't think really. Well, I don't know. Formally, the type of theatre that we look to make is not particularly cutting edge, but it turns out often the technology that ends up being the best way to tell the story. It turns out that normally it's something that hasn't really been looked at before, and I'm not saying that there hadn't been VR shows before, but certainly there hadn't been, to my knowledge, VR shows with that many people at once. So the sort of innovation comes from quite odd places, or I hadn't put myself in the context where someone at a digital conference could have told me that had been done, and if I had done that, it would have been a lot easier to do. I wish I'd done that. Would have made everything a lot easier. But who has the time to go to digital conferences all the time? Turns out.
Have the time, but not the money.
Yeah,
let's be clear, so don't get to that many.
I mean, I think that, yeah, again, the sort of DIY quality of it feels important, and it feels important that there. I mean, you know, that people you have to want to tell a story that doesn't use a video projector to take people into a coral reef. You have to want to put people into a headset, and then you have to be mad enough like me to go and film underwater with a hacked camera, having looked at YouTube tutorials. So that kind of like, it is a messy thing to do. It's and can be a very dangerous thing to do. So that's sort of full stop on that really. Sorry, I might have some more tarmac later. Yeah.
Can I just ask on that kind of talking about describing the performance and the combination of VR at the same time, not at the same time, in the same performance, also live action.
Yeah.
But also the fact that you always bring a scientific strand in your work. And I find very interestingly paradoxical the way you describe your work as emotionally charged, scientific-led performance, because usually we won't describe science as emotionally charged.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how you negotiate that tension there.
I mean, that's always there because we want people to know that we want people to know they're going to come and see humans going through some serious stuff. Might be funny stuff, but they're going to see humans going through big channels of drama rather than it being, an educative TED conference on stage.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, it definitely and quite often begins with vocation. So, Frogband's about a coral reef scientist who's at work, and she, a detective turns up and tells her that her dad has been charged with the murder of a 13-year-old 20 years ago. Yeah. So it's, that's quite a kind of a facer. And the idea of emotionally charged is just to consider the realm of scientific methodology as a kind of quick fix in everyone's mind, thinks a sort of logic and a dryness, whereas often I've done panel talks with scientists I've worked with, and they say and these are people who are operating kind of right at the top of the pyramid of academic structures, and they say they have to think like artists all the time to think openly about how to address the problems they're trying to solve. So I mean the characters that drive the shows and the drama, I mean often they're quite unusual scientists in the sense, a coral reef scientist is from the natural world, so that comes with a lot of kind of environmental science kind of offshoots. And
So they're not hardcore scientists, that's why they're kind of
well,
interested.
we've worked with a quantum biologist before, and that was pretty intimidating. I mean, it's intimidating when a quantum biologist sort of is kind of struggling to explain what it is that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Can I ask just a final question for me, and then I'll open up to the floor for questions. I was just thinking about if you think, and this is kind of double question, so feel free to respond to one of the strands if you feel like it, or both, whatever you prefer. Do you think that social media in your work or the way you think about artistic practice is relevant to you? Or do you think there is a limitation that there's nothing else to use them for? That's one thing. And the other thing is the concept of the experience of immersion. Would you describe, what would you describe as immersive experiences? Do you think that, for those of you who make work, do you think that your performances had to be immersive in some ways in order to be successful? Or even actually, if you're not making work, if you think that as audience makers or as facilitators of these events, do you think that immersion is an important component of the audience experience? Or is something that perhaps has different, obviously, definitions, has been stressed out? Also, there is quite a lot of polemical debate against immersion. So I'm just wondering how people think about these two perhaps different but also overlapping areas. Feel free to choose.
I'll talk about immersion from an audience perspective, because I'm not a maker, but I do commission work and curate work. I'm really interested in the immersion thing as a kind of problematic. VR is a technology to me, and I'm talking about VR strictly rather than 360 video.
Yeah.
VR to me is a technology that is in its current state. I mean, and we're on the kind of like fourth wave of people trying to make VR happen. And there are lots of issues with it, but I think in terms of the work that I've seen to date is if it can feel very exploitative to me. So VR is sold as an empathy engine. It's a way of making you feel something that somebody to experience somebody else's life, right? So you can be, I've seen work that is, experience what it's like to be bipolar, experience what it's like to be autistic, and all these kind of things. And to me, that feels very exploitative, because at the end of the day, I can take the headset off and walk away from those experiences. And I suppose my question to people that make VR, if there are any here, is to think about why you want the audience to be in that space, because it's a very passive space. And there are certain things you can wear handsets and maybe move stuff around, but it's generally quite a passive experience. And I saw a piece last year which was a coming out story of a teenage boy in America who came out to his parents, who then basically beat him half to death. So the creators of this thing have put me in this experience because I guess they wanted me to have some kind of empathy with what's going on, and I'm a queer man myself, and if I was in that situation, there is no way that I would not be helping that kid. Right? So you've put me there, you've given me no agency. So that just feels incredibly exploitative of that kid's pain and that kid's experience to me. Like dressing something up as kind of entertainment or art, which is about feeding off other people's misery, is something that I find quite difficult. And I might have slightly gone off the topic there, but that's kind of my experience of those kind of immersive experiences.
That was just how you talked about VR as immersive and the kind of empathy thing. Just made me think of theatre. I kind of, in a way, that live theatre is the ultimate immersive empathy kind of thing, isn't it? So I've not seen any of your work, but that sounds like it'd be quite interesting if you're combining the two. whether that leads to more sort of...
It's interesting, the question of for example, with Frogman, the question of passivity. Everyone's asked it. And the sense, I think that's to do with, Live Action 360 and VR are obviously two really different things. There's some really great diagrams, actually, that kind of talk you through all the different elements of the two, and I remember reading that, and thinking how helpful that was. And I guess in theatre, if you are looking for clues in it, if you imagine a post-box theatre design where there's stuff happening visually around you, and I think that the passivity, I kind of not sure I agree with you on that, because if you're setting up a narrative and you're watching actors in 360 work out a situation through, it's a scene playing out, I think you are actively watching what emotional journey they're going on, and in that sense you are very much like a theatre audience, but you just happen to be, it depends how you're framed, and it sounds like you had a really negative experience, and I agree with you, there are tons of really inappropriate uses of Live Action 360, but I think there's still something active, not in an intellectual sense, in the sense that you are pursuing a story in your head. VR, of course, with new experiences where you're on a running machine or all that, active is not what you're saying. But I agree with you on Chris Milk, who founded, it's now called Within, which is an app that everyone actually probably, if people are interested in watching VR stuff, should download and have a look at their stuff. But yeah, he started this whole empathy machine nonsense, and he gets booed a lot now, which is funny.
Good.
But someone had to sort of put a stake in the ground, I think. I'm not a fan of Chris Milk and his work, but someone had to sort of say, maybe this is what VR is. And it's a classic case of a company being set up to be bought by Universal or something like that. But if we think of, a colleague of mine wrote a book called Beyond Immersive Theatre, so how long has everyone got?
Adam, and also it's interesting that the majority of the case studies don't use technology or VR. One of the main case studies also is not Shant, but also I wanted to mention the other very big company that Punchdrunk, yes, Punchdrunk, which actually most of the shows they don't use technology, they're more kind of site-specific shows. So I think it's interesting how each one of us connect the concept or the experience of immersion with different type of work, either technologically oriented or not. Sorry, Jack, I interrupted you.
No, yeah, it's true. It's true. I guess that Punchdrunk are a design company. They're not a theatre company, really, I think.
Well.
Are they?
I think they probably self-identify them.
Well, sure, but I think that they create these extraordinary fictions of landscape, and you walk in and you're like, wow, how is this, but I don't, maybe it's because I don't, I've been to one or two of the shows, and I just find it very strange that I'm in a landscape wearing a mask, and I haven't perhaps had you hear of people, don't you, having these amazing experiences, but I don't know anyone from Punchdrunk. I'd be fascinated to hear about what they think of immersion.
Don't call them designers, all of them.
Oh, really?
I'm just kidding, I don't know.
No, I don't know.
I don't even know why I'm defending them. Anyway, Sophie, would you like to talk about either immersion or social media?
The social media. I think it's interesting because, especially with theatre, because of how bad it's been for accessibility in the past. I think it's all to do with, I don't know if you experience this as well, to trust, especially for deaf people, trusting the company or the venue or the people that they're interacting with. So social media it's been really important in that, because before that, I think, before social media, a lot deaf people their communities are sort of in pockets. They're not that spread out, so they're in pockets around, and social media just connects those pockets and allows people to trust
the unknown and allows them to trust that the play they're going to see tonight isn't going to be horrendously not accessible for them, or the captions aren't going to be wrong, or the interpreters aren't going to be horrendous. So I think it's really important in that sense to for them to use it. And there's everyone has been transformed by social media, I think, and that definitely includes deaf people.
Yeah, I think it's interesting about social media because on the one hand, I think where it allows the connection, where it allows the conversations, the collection of lists, all of those sorts of things are really, because it's about you connecting with people that you wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with, isn't it? And that's really good. So I think in a way, when you were just talking, it made me think about one of the reasons that we were doing the difference engine as well was to something that you said earlier. It's about putting the sort of all that captioning and all of that stuff into the hands of the artists and the creatives, allowing creative people just to play with the possibilities of these tools and see what else they can do at the edges or wherever it happens to be. And so I think there is a connection somewhere here, something to do with taking the captioning and all of the accessibility out of the hands of the marketing department. It's not a marketing act. Social media, take it out of the hands of the marketing people. It should be a creative conversation between you and your audience, or you and your other creatives, or I guess. So I suppose it is relevant, but equally it's kind of quite nice to not just ignore it a lot of the time as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the best accessible performances is where it's at the core of it, and it's not an afterthought, and it's not we need to make this accessible, let's plonk whatever we can on it. It's about making it integral as part of the process.
I think if it's part of the work itself, it's like baked into the work.
Yeah.
It isn't a bolt on. It isn't like tick a box because we need
to
do this.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who does really interesting work around audio description and kind of building that into film. It's cool.
Great, thank you very much. So, over to you, audience. Please ask questions.
Easy questions.
Thank you, everyone. Fascinating to hear your different points of view. I got a question which is about the evanescence, or the kind of semi-permanent documentation of the kinds of work that you've been talking about, which comes out of the fact that I know that the text of Dante or Die show tonight is going to be published as a book. And there's going to be a streamed video of the show, obviously from particular camera points of view. And Marmello are talking about releasing the app which the show uses, and so it can be used by people. So in all these ways, the show is going to have a sort of life beyond its kind of evanescent theatre existence. So I wonder whether you have thoughts reflecting on this idea about the immersivity, the kind of experiential sensations of being in this kind of work, and how its preservation or its afterlife connects to what it's trying to do.
This is interesting. You can protect the artifacts of that work, but you can't. You can capture. You can keep. You can archive the artifacts of that work. You can publish the script, but you can't recreate that experience. You can't capture that experience in kind of in any real way. So I guess, maybe there's no point in keeping all that stuff. Maybe the critical maybe the critical thing is that you experience the thing. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, but I'm just thinking out loud. Really.
I just thought it was really interesting because that's the whole premise of their show, isn't it? It's like because you're giving us all the little bits. So you'll have the script, you'll have the the app, you'll have, and that's all the little social media things that somebody's left. You won't have the life. You won't have the actual life of the show or of the That's the whole premise of it. It's just quite nice, a little bit of. I mean, I think it's a sort of. I think that's been. I think that's a tension for theatre companies forever. As soon as we could afford video cameras, that's been a kind of tension for theatre makers, because actually it's so much better in life, in real life. You know, the video, it never looks any good on the video. It's how you remember it, actually. It's all those little moments, and how you particularly saw them and experienced them and remembered them, and the connections you made to your life, your experiences, the story you know, all of that kind of classic.
Now you then misremember them as
Exactly,
well. It's part of that process.
Yeah. How you understood something totally different from the person sitting next to you when you had the conversation. Oh, right, okay.
I think it's interesting to give the control to the audience that may or may not have seen it, because it's entirely up to you how far you delve into that afterlife. I don't know if that's the right word to use.
Good word to use.
How far you go into it, because I think I agree with you. Like, it's so much better being there, but that's all that's all out of your control. But then afterwards, you can control that, and I think that's something really interesting.
Can I just add something to that, really, which I think is that you're bringing in the question of geographical accessibility, which, as someone who's been working at the kind of English periphery for a long time, feels really important. We might not have the same experience as a person attending the live event, but we can create an experience, and we can share the opportunities to have that experience with our students, with our peers, with our networks, wherever we may be based. And I feel that needs to be encouraged and sustained, because we have the digital power to do that now. And so in a sense, it's not an either or, either the live or the mediated. It's both are possible, and both are different kinds of audience experiences and audience relationships to the work that's being made. That's all. It wasn't a question.
If the performance is created by the audience in performance, it's their personal experience that is the performance. In VR?
What was that for me? That's a really complicated question. Is your question?
Well, I was just thinking about commission. If it's captured, that performance is captured, and then we're using an app and then passing that captured performance on.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's talking about audience participation, but also audience permission.
Yeah, I mean, ours doesn't. I don't know. You might have seen work that ours isn't like that at all. Ours was the VR, the live action 360 where you're wearing headsets. Part of the show was filmed inside a built children's bedroom in Brisbane, in Australia, working with young kids from schools, and then also filmed underwater in a coral reef. So audiences, were very much not part of it. But I guess I haven't really heard of live streamed VR, live streamed live action 360 that becomes like a captured.
No, I haven't heard of it.
I haven't heard of that. I mean, it's probably because streaming live action 360 into multiple synced headsets is quite tricky. Normally it's preloaded. If anyone's into football, the BBC have a really good World Cup VR app, which is absolutely mad. You could be on the goal line and wear a VR headset. I watched a game the other night. It was off the scale amazing. Just for someone who doesn't like football but likes VR, I was like, I'll try this. I'm converted. I don't know about. I mean, I guess the role of what you ask an audience to bring to smaller interactive immersive experiences, and then whether that does become the artifact is a really interesting one. There's lots of work that has done that, I would argue, but maybe less so with it being captured digitally. It's a really interesting question about like the role of commissioning bodies like The Space and what they mean by capture, and the challenges of, and so who are you capturing it for? What's the actual central purpose of creating an artifact of this living, breathing, amazing thing that once you're hooked in, you never give it up. Yeah, I don't know.
Dan, and then Jen, and then...
I had a question around, is anyone aware of any ways in which new technologies are enabling access beyond deaf and blind people? I'm thinking of, I used to work in the box office at the Almeida, and we had a regular audience member who had Tourette's, and the rest of the audience would often complain about him. We would have conversations around that. And it's very interesting. And I know there's a lot more relaxed performances now, which is brilliant. But is there anything technology can do in that, or is it just that we have relaxed performances?
I'm not aware of technology on that kind of. It's not really my area of knowledge, but just in response to that, is it more about audience awareness and being as a society being more aware of that kind of thing? And yeah, relaxed performances are great, but is it more about encouraging and making audiences in society aware that it's not acceptable to complain about that kind of thing? It's not nice and it's not kind. I don't know. Do you know what anyone
I think that
thinks?
goes a bit to what you were saying about you can only go to this performance of something because that's the one that's captioned or has the hearing loop or whatever. So I think it's a similar sort of thing. It's like relaxed performances are great, but that shouldn't be the norm.
I know, that's what we always say. We always say that like all performances should be relaxed performances, then we can just have a few uptight performances.
Yeah.
You don't want to actually have a one.
I was going to say, I guess it's down to, isn't it sometimes to do with the temperature created by the artists making the work, or the director, or the story, or I can't ever imagine people complaining in a Tim Crouch play about that, because everyone is just there with each other, you know? Whereas if it's lights down and you will watch this, that's a different social contract that's been set up, and tethered with that, I imagine that theatre people are paying lots of money, and they equate money to like their thing, and you know, I guess that's part of it, isn't it?
Okay, a final quick question. Then is it a quick one?
I'm just going to add to that actually, and sorry, I'm awful with names. Well worth seeing Jess Tom for democratising performance and accessibility, but there's an Arts Council Nesta R&D piece which is for young autistic people experiencing circus for the first time. A whole archive of them. It's not about it's not about a sort of inclusive performance. It's about democratising the whole experience so anyone can experience the same performance. Nesta R&D, worth having a Google.
May I?
Yeah, quick one.
Yeah, no, it's just to return to the question of the role of the spectator participant and how, as makers and curators, you foresee a change in the levels of agency of the spectator and possibly even diminishing the role of the artist.
I was at Sheffield Documentary Festival a couple of weekends ago. I don't know if anyone else was there. There's a fantastic piece there called Terminal 3. It was in their alternate reality section. And it's an AR piece, actually, as opposed to VR, which to me is a slightly more interesting technology. But it was a fully interactive experience, which, you know, in the sea of things which you couldn't really do anything, you just had to experience them, was a kind of complete breath of fresh air. And it felt like a game changer to me, because the way that you interacted with this hologram changed the way the hologram exists. And that felt like a really powerful thing. And it was in a very specific situation as well, of a kind of immigration situation. And that was a really powerful piece of work, and that felt like quite a big step forward to me.
Yeah, I agree that augmented reality, from a slightly different perspective, what augmented reality offers is this unusual relationship with actual presence around other people and something that's clearly been crafted digitally. So the juxtaposition of something like Frogman, where it's live and you're going from collective to individual backwards and forwards, there's a really interesting kind of experiential tension in that. But I think that a mixed reality or augmented reality will be very much the sort of uptake will explode, I think, for that reason, just because I think in a theatre we love to be, well, some people do, not everyone, like to be side by side with other humans and experience the same things that those other humans are enjoying. And with
Which
AR...
is never the same thing, is it? I mean, we think we experience the same thing, but we never hardly ever experience the same thing.
Sure, exactly. And then, I guess it's where the execution of the possibilities of augmented work and mixed work, be it a wearable kind of HoloLens type mixed world, or through tablets and clicking into the devices we hold in our hands already, which is something that feels like the boundaries between what we have in our everyday lives and what we do. And then the question of whether that is inside a black box as well is really fun and interesting, I think.
Okay, great. I'm afraid we're running out of time. We've run out of time, that's it. So thank you very much. A really very interesting discussion. Really, thank you.
Just do the uptight performance.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too...
No. Terminal 3.
Yeah, it's called
wasn't sure I knew where it was. I knew there was some. I'm delighted to welcome Rosie here. She's never been here before, and somebody whose work I've been interested in reading for several years now. Rosie's, we've called her a keynote, but it isn't really that. It's a kind of final chat. Rosie is Director of Research at East 15 Acting School, which is part of the University of Essex. I'm sure that's a very difficult job. I would like to know more about it. Her research investigates media, sound and spectatorship, and she teaches contemporary performance practice. Prior to joining East 15 in 2017, she was head of Department of Drama and Theatre at the University of Kent, where she taught since 2007. Her co-authored book, Multimedia Performance, was published with Palgrave in 2012, and she has since published in journals such as Contemporary Theatre Review, Performance Research, International Journal of Performing Arts and Digital Media, and Body, Space and Technology. And she's also undertaken various practices research projects, working in collaboration with performers, videographers, and designers and photographers. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Lucy and to Lib for what has been a fantastic afternoon already. And I'm really looking forward to the performance tonight. So I've written quite a bit and experimented a little bit with headphone theatre. So I'm afraid we're kind of taking a step back from the VR, well, at least the visual VR, and looking just in a really quite specific way at headphone listening and what that can provide. I've written a bit about what it might mean to think through an auditory framework as opposed to a visualist framework. And I guess it's in that capacity that I've been invited to talk today. There's so many things about headphone theatre that we could talk about. There's interesting topics have come up today. The thing of personalised theatre and the bespoke experience I think is really interesting that Dan was mentioning. The absence of live actors and working now at an acting school. Some of my colleagues were horrified at this idea that I was creating a kind of work that didn't actually need to pay live actors on a regular basis. The relationship between sonic VR and everyday spaces, the ethics of working with audience-generated material, all of those things. But I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to talk, because it was a symposium around social media and immersive theatre, and because I'm not looking at social media, I thought I would look quite specifically at the topic of immersion and auditory immersion in headphone theatre. 9 years ago, after the 2009 Edinburgh Festival, theatre critic Matt Truman complained in an article for The Guardian that... Wait for it. I don't know what button to press. I'm going to do it like that. That people keep sticking things in his ears, specifically theatre makers and headphones. He said, whether they deliver live transmissions or pre-recorded tracks, personal audio devices are threatening to become the latest must-have theatrical accessory. After seeing pieces by Rota Zaza, Slung Low and Duncan Speakman, Truman complained that while one may feel active, they're actually passive. He says, we are told where to move, where to look, and even what to think. It's a form of submission, stripping us of our agency. Over the past 9 years, we've seen the development of a significant body of work now in the form of headphone theatre that employs the imaginative use of headphone technologies to interrogate the relationship of seeing and hearing, and exploring the psychology, physiology, and dramaturgy of audience immersion. I needed an image to put up in the background while I spoke for a bit, and I've chosen this one. It's a piece by Lundahl and Seatles, their Symphony from a Missing Room, just because it was one of my favourites. You know, there's such an enormous body of work to choose from. Okay. In my talk today, I want to argue that the performative element of such productions often lies in the performance of the participant's perceptual apparatus and the workings of what Lars Ellerström calls our internal technical media. Matt Truman berated the passivity of sonic immersion, but I'd like to suggest that sonic immersion can implicate the listener's body in various interesting ways, with sound transgressing the boundaries of body in the world and triggering intersensorial perception. In my talk, I will suggest that headphone theatre facilitates a form of self-aware immersion that draws the audience's attention to their own perceptual processes, with particular emphasis on the often less prominent interoceptive and proprioceptive systems. Headphone theatre can provide an experience of contemplative immersion, for self-reflection from the inside out, forcing consideration of one's bodily ownership, material boundaries, internal space, and being in the world. Perhaps now a subgenre of immersive theatre, though also connected to a history of ambulatory arts practices, headphone theatre is rooted within a digital performance paradigm that uses locative, wearable, audio, and mobile devices to facilitate immersive and intersensorial audience experiences. The recent popularity of headphone theatre, certainly in the UK, is indicative of a shift in intermedial performance practices from an interest in telepresence and virtual networking to an emphasis on the somatosensory modalities of media technologies. A subsection of headphone theatre can be identified by its use of the specific capacity of binaural audio tech to facilitate sonic immersion. Building on a history of binaural sound usage in audio works such as those by Janet Cardiff from 1991, contemporary headphone theatre creates experiences of listening to binaural sound in contexts that can range from traditional theatres to everyday urban environments to staged outdoor performance venues. Productions such as those by David Rosenberg and Glenn Neath use binaural and surround sound tech to embrace an aesthetic of VR simulation, setting up an encounter for the audience with a sonic virtual reality that emphasises corporeal sensation, affect and embodiment. David Rosenberg and Glenn Neath's Seance, which I saw last year at the Edinburgh Festival, was the third collaboration between writer Neath and director Rosenberg using binaural sound in Total Darkness following their production of Ring in 2012 and then Fiction in 2014. Unlike these two earlier works, which are nearly an hour long, Seance is only 15 minutes. The show lacks the kind of meditative, narrative qualities of the earlier works, but instead offers a short, visceral, immersive experience exploring the human capacity for superstition and the contagious nature of fear. The headphone-wearing audience of 20 are seated inside a customised shipping container on velvet chairs around a long table with their backs to the wall. Hanging over the table are small metal bells that are suspended with cord, and the audience are asked to place their hands flat on the table for the duration of the performance. The lights go out and we hear the sound of a door opening and a man enter the space. The audience are participants in a seance, and this man is our medium. He moves through the space, whispering in our ears, walks the length of the table, and conjures spirits in the darkness. And I thought I would just show you the little trailer video of the work so that you get a sense of the atmosphere.
Everyone place your hands on the table, and we allow spirit to pass amongst us. Do not take your hands off the table, or spirit will be loose. Beloved, join with us and move among us. Is there anybody there?
The show, although it doesn't seem it from that actually, now I think about it, but it doesn't just rely on special effects or on making the audience jump in surprise, although that is obviously quite a big part of it. But it evokes an uneasiness, a wariness, and an interest in the line between the real and the imagined, playing with one's openness to the perception of the paranormal. It's an experiment in the nature of fear itself. Whilst rationally one knows the sounds are not live, the body responds to the objects and entities it senses in space. I do not suspend my disbelief, rather I cling to it. Glenn Neath explains that in making the work, we took a long time to come to the conclusion that we didn't want to show the technology. With VR, you've got this headset on, so you know you're in this virtual world. Whereas with ours, we're playing with the idea that we don't know what's real and what's not. The specific materiality of over-the-ear headphones creates a physical barrier between the world and the wearer's ears, rendering the latter deaf to all but the performance text. These noise-cancelling headphones enforce perceptual immersion. There is little, if any, background noise. Headphone theatre has none of what Ross Brown calls the noisy circumstances of the audience. There is a digital precision, a clarity to the sound quality, so that there is no distracting evidence of its mediation, and no unplanned intrusions of the real. Binaural recording itself is a centuries-old technique that is experiencing a kind of revival in theatre and developing commercial prominence as a key feature of virtual reality. Using headphones to experience sound as if through the ears of another has actually been the focus of pursuits, though, since the early 20th century. In 1933, at the Chicago World Fair, the first binaural transmission system was demonstrated using a mechanical dummy called Oscar with microphones in each of his ears. Oscar was positioned in a glass box, and the public could listen to what Oscar heard in real time via headsets. Building on the same principles of Oscar's transmission system, this access to an experience of another's perception and the effect of this on one's own sensorium is the basis upon which this sector of headphone theatre builds. Whilst using significantly more sophisticated technological platforms, these productions rely on the same principles of recording sound using a dummy head. When the binaural soundscape accessed via headphones is experienced in an environment other than that which is sonically depicted, the effects can make one not just aware, but wary of sensory perception. It's difficult to present a paper on the topic of headphone theatre in 2018 without acknowledging the extraordinary success of one production in particular, which originally performed at the Barbican in 2016, was revived at the Barbican last month, and continues its substantial international tour. It's enjoyed sold-out runs, 5-star reviews, and a transfer to Broadway. In fact, I think I just heard earlier this week that it's being turned into a feature film. I'm not sure how that's going to work. For Film 4, directed by Kevin MacDonald. Anyway, I am, of course, talking about Complicité's The Encounter, in which Simon McBurney performs a 2-hour feat of dynamic storytelling using live binaural sound created using a Naumann Dubby head mic. You can see that there. Various other on-stage mics, Foley effects, pre-recorded sound, and cinematic background music. The story McBurney brings to life is American photographer Lauren McIntyre's visit to the Amazon jungle in 1969, and his encounter with the Mayaruna tribe, as recorded in the book Amazon Beaming by Petri Popescu. McBurney tells us that the function of stories are to enable the listener to enter into the consciousness of the protagonist, and the use of binaural sound places each audience member at the centre of the protagonist's world and sonically renders their immediate environment. So I thought, I know many of you will have seen this, if not all of you, but I thought I would just show the trailer for The Encounter, just as a reminder, or for anyone who hasn't seen it.
So if you put on your headphones, and if I were to breathe in your ear, your brain would tell you that I was really breathing in your ear, and it might even start to get hot.
He didn't speak to me. I think he spoke to me without words. Just as Barnacle undid my spell by running counterclockwise, I could be the crack between here and there, the crack through which another time, our time, might flood.
You go to the Caves landscape and you see a sequence of 13 dots, and above the 13th dot is this huge, great big animal. To understand time, you have to understand something a bit ritualistic, something which is repeating, whether that be your
McBurney creates the sound of a river lapping by slowly shaking a water bottle around the microphone, And by trampling a pile of old recording tape, McBurney creates the sound of crunching leaves underneath our feet. My attention is drawn to my own embodiment, both through the material engagement with binaural sound and through the content of the story. McBurney describes the protagonist's encounter with the rainforest as involving cut skin, breath, dehydration, eating, and indigestion. MacIntyre experiences illness, thirst, fear, and some kind of hallucinatory episode. He wakes up believing that the village is under attack, and in fleeing, thorns rip at his skin and insects flock around his head. MacIntyre's inundation with jungle fauna is viscerally depicted by McBurney using his rather rustic on-stage toolkit and three-dimensional sound tech. That sound is immersive has been much discussed. Jean-Luc Nancy asserts that while visual presence exists prior to one's encounter with it, sonorous presence arrives. It entails an attack, as musicians and acousticians say, and animal bodies in general, the human body in particular, are not constructed to interrupt at their leisure the sonorous arrival. Sound is pervasive, and as Murray Schafer asserts, we have no earlids, we are condemned to listen. However, as Schafer's mention of condemnation and Nancy's mention of attack suggest, explanations of sonic immersion often portray the experience as entirely passive, as involving absorption or rapture, or as being held hostage to the inescapable, as opposed to critical thought, engagement, and reflection. Frank Popper describes immersion as diminishing critical distance from what is shown and increasing emotional investment in what is happening. This understanding of immersion as passive or mindless is echoed in discussions of sonic immersion and the experience of recorded sound. Theodore Adorno says of recorded sound, by encircling people, by enveloping them, it contributes ideologically to the integration which modern society never tires of achieving in reality. It leaves no room for conceptual reflection between itself and the subject. Headphone theatre, as addressed here, envelops listeners in sound. However, in the staging of recorded sound, a space is made between itself and the subject, and as such, these works not only leave room for, but insist on conceptual reflection. Audience experience of these headphone theatre productions can involve both immersion and critical reflection. Audience members may experience an oscillation or duality of these states, both thinking and feeling. These works facilitate audience engagement, best described as, I think, contemplative immersion, a phrase that might initially sound paradoxical. Unlike the experiential quality of immersion, when we contemplate, we're meant to be rational, logical, analytical. These audio productions demand a form of involvement in which the audience member is immersed and yet is simultaneously cognizant of their own immersion, and entails an experience of the texture and qualities of the matter in which one is immersed, whilst reflecting on how one experiences immersion. In headphone theatre, that within which the audience is immersed could be called what Marshall McLuhan labels auditory space, or what Jean-Luc Nancy calls the sonorous present, which he suggests is the result of space-time. It spreads through space, or rather it opens a space that is its own, the very spreading out of its resonance, its expansion, and its reverberation. While sound or listening is often thought of as temporal or linear, so the impact of music, for example, relies on the ability to relate sounds through time. The notion of immersion can involve a sense of being outside of time. Video gamers, for example, often report that a particular feature of immersion in video games is the loss of awareness of time passing. Immersive sound is spatial and functions to spatialize. Nancy describes the sonorous present as opening a space that is its own, a space that is immediately omnidirectional and transversate through spaces. Sound penetrates and inhabits the body and its environment. And in the case of immersive sound as experienced in headphone theatre, it colonises the visual, the environmental, the material. Nancy's sonorous present is not dissimilar to Marshall McLuhan's understanding of auditory space, which he defines as a field of simultaneous relations without centre or periphery. In his paper, Inside the Five Senses, McLuhan writes, "It is the act of hearing that creates auditory space because we hear from every direction at once." The use of audio technologies in performance creates various dimensions of auditory space that surround, implicate, and stem from the body of the listener. In exploring the engagement of the body immersed in sound, it's necessary to accept a Gibsonian understanding of the senses as potentially overlapping, a consideration of hearing as involving one's entire body and sensory apparatus. In the examples of headphone theatre addressed here, immersion in auditory space showcases the listening experience as fundamentally intersensorial and draws the listener's attention to their own perceptual processing. Headphone theatre functions to trigger the audience's visual imagination as they visualise the sonic information they receive. Auditory space also engages the participant somesthetically, involving not just the faculties of hearing but proprioception and touch, which together with the modality of temperature sensation work to create perception of environmental elements in a process of haptics. With the status of the visual undermined as a result of auditory dominance, as in the case of the encounter, or in the absence of sight altogether, as in the case of seance, our haptic senses become of central importance to our awareness of the world. Haptics are the porous frontier of the body, the indistinct boundary between self and environment. Immersion in auditory space in headphone listening is experienced haptically, as sound is brought to bear on the listener's body. Sonic immersion creates a profound self-awareness of one's body's schema, the proprioceptive system, the system that provides our sense of equilibrium and being in the space, responds to sound as a spatial and proximate presence. In these performances, characters whisper into the ears of participants, and the effects of the binaural recording create a sensation of physical proximity. A voice speaks to my right, and I feel the speaker standing beside me. With the modality of hearing entwined with those of touch and proprioception, immersion in auditory space is full-bodied and experienced through the skin. Michel Serres argues, the ear is no more to be located in any one place than the skin. The skin, suggests Serres, receives all the senses together. Our wide, long, variable envelope hears much, sees little, and secretly breathes perfumes. In headphone listening, the body is submerged in acoustic space and sound rushes the skin that draws back from and reaches out for the bodies of those whispering nearby. It senses the space in between its surface and the surface of the objects off of which sound bounces and is absorbed, so velvet furniture or rainforest leaves. In the encounter, Simon McBurney draws the listener's attention to the sensitivity of the skin. He emphasises sensations of touch and texture. He describes the qualities of leaves brushing fingers and the thick, clammy, humid air. He describes burning feet and ripped skin, and in one scene in which the protagonist suffers from a tropical illness, he describes carnivorous maggots hatching from underneath the skin. McBurney's performance attunes our body's sensitivity to the role of the skin in defending against, in the enjoyment of, and in its incorporation with the world. In addition to a heightened sense of one's physical positioning within external space, the use of binaural sound also has the potential to provide an intimate sense of one's interior space. As Jean-Luc Nancy explains, that sound penetrates through the ear, propagates throughout the entire body something of its effects. The process of hearing involves not just skin, but flesh and bone. The body conducts sound, which impregnates and inhabits its interior spaces. Headphone theatre can strategically draw attention to the interiority of the body and the passing of sound into and around the chamber of the body box. Sound bounces through the body mass, and the eardrum extends across the entire body drum. These productions exploit the psychoacoustics of headphones, which produce a vivid imaging of one's own headspace. So headphones produce an effect that acoustic engineers called in-head acoustic imaging, which involves the perception of a space not out there in the world, but inside one's own head. Headphones enable an awareness of the space between the ears. Space is created inside the body, and the audience are faced with an uncanny consciousness of their own interior. In the encounter, the protagonist believes he is receiving telepathic communications from the tribe leader, who he calls Barnacle. And the audience hears the leader's voice as if it were spatially located between their own ears, forcing contemplation of where and in what one locates their internal voice. In seance, the listener experiences a sonic entity, or for narrative purposes, a paranormal spirit, entering one ear, moving through and around the tissue of the brain, bouncing about the cranial cavity, and eventually exiting the body. In different ways, these works draw attention to the listener's interoception, the process of appraising one's internal systems, including the respiratory, digestive, and cardiovascular systems. Sound is a significant element in interoception. One of the key measures for testing an individual's interoception is their ability to accurately hear their own heartbeat. And while elements of the interoceptive system may be felt, they are also heard, i.e. You can hear your heartbeat, your stomach grumbling, breath sounds. In seance, the listener hears a heartbeat. You heard it in the advertisement for it. The listener hears a heartbeat that seems to originate from the same location as the listener's own heart. And whether the listener momentarily mistakes it for their own or not, consideration is given to the functioning of the circulatory system and the pace of its pulse as an indicator of emotional state. In the encounter, McBurney describes McIntyre gobbling food after a period of hunger. And we hear in 3 dimensions the intimate, visceral, squelchy sounds of chewing and swallowing. And as I hear McIntyre swallow, with the sounds seeming to originate from where they would be if I was swallowing, I envisage a piece of food that McIntyre has consumed, making its way down my own esophagus and extinguishing pangs of hunger and triggering digestion. So I'm just going to offer a kind of brief little conclusion. While these works use digitally mediated sound to trigger intersensorial effects, it's not just these overt manifestations of intersensorial trickery that are drawn to our attention, but also the ongoing and usually unacknowledged performance of our perceptual mechanisms as we sense and make sense of real and virtual environments. In staging the phenomenon of oral perception, headphone theatre explores the physical encounter of the body and the world. By placing an auditory lens over the visual, headphones establish a defamiliarization, a making strange of the visual scene. These works create perceptual doubt and highlight the subjectivity of reality as apprehended through the senses. Headphone theatre places a spotlight on the taken for granted of everyday life, staging the acts of looking and listening, and affirming Alva No's suggestion that seeing is not simply an automatic process in the brain, but it is an undertaking. It is a skills-based activity of environmental exploration. Sense perception is not something that happens in or to an individual, but is something done. Contemplative immersion in headphone theatre reveals the listener's body as fundamentally resonant. The resonant body is a body inhabited by sound, open to sound and opened out by sound in the process of listening. Francis Dyson suggests, in listening, One is engaged in a synergy with the world and the senses, a hearing touch that is the essence of what we mean by gut reaction, a response that is simultaneously physiological and psychological, body and mind. Dyson's hearing touch speaks to the imbrication of hearing and haptics, and in the productions discussed here, the audience respond physiologically to a sound world that implicates the body, working across and through the skin, inhabiting the sonorous mass within and triggering proprioception and interoceptive awareness. The body is both sounding board and echo chamber. McBurney's storytelling and the dialogue in Seance involve a dramaturgy that creates theme and meaning physiologically, a dramaturgy of hearing touch that performs through and within the gut reaction of the audience. The resonant body is both permeated and inhabited by sound, and its own sonority made prominent with sound, the means by which the interior of the body communicates through interoceptive awareness. Far from mindless, as depictions of sonic immersion often imply, this experience can be self-aware, mindful, and indeed contemplative. The audience attend to the bodily sensations of listening, and as such, to their body's situation in its environment, experiencing immersion not passively, but as a participant alert to the embodied performance of listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. We should have finished 20 minutes ago, but I think there are probably one or two questions that people would like to ask Rosie, and so I suggest that we just take 5 or 10 minutes, and then of course we can continue with those questions once we get down to South Street and we have a drink. So can I ask if there are any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I've got one. I haven't seen, thank you, it was really interesting. I haven't seen Seance, and I got the impression that it's pre-recorded, is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could reflect on the differences between the pre-recorded and the live production of sound from the audience experience, or whether there is any for you.
Yeah, I think there is. I'm not sure it necessarily changed how we listen. I think what's interesting in the encounter is the tension between what we see and what we hear. And what I quite like about that is the evidence of labour that goes into the making of the sound. So we can see, you know, the physicality and McBurney's labour in making this performance for us. And I think that labour is very hidden when all of the sound is pre-recorded. Having said that, there are a number of headphone theatre pieces that I haven't really talked about here at all, but where that tension between looking and listening is the primary focus of the performance. So performances that happen usually in everyday spaces involving some kind of navigation, usually around an urban environment, and it's all about trying to connect what you see and what you hear. I'm not quite sure that happens in the same way in Encounter because the lights go very low. He explains to us all about how the technology works so that we're not taken in by it. It's not just an illusion. But then I think actually, I don't know about you, but my breathing slows down and actually you can soften focus on what you're seeing. And there is that ability to oscillate between focusing between those two states, and I think that's quite interesting. But I think the overarching sensation is that sense of sonic immersion.
Any other? I have a question. Well, I'm not quite sure if it's a question, but a kind of observation. I think it's fascinating, and of course, I'm very interested in the developments around sound and binaural sound, non-binaural sound, different kinds of spaces that produces. But I'm also interested in actually what the difference is between digitally produced sound and, if you like, the sound that was produced before we had digital technologies. and whether some of the things that you talk about actually could be discussed in relation to pre-digital sound. So when we were making sound live, a long time ago, I wrote an article about soundscapes of a Margaret Duras play, and all of the soundscapes they weren't made. There was a analog technology, so it wasn't as if there was no technology at all. But nevertheless, of course, there wasn't this kind of intensive feeling of sound, but there was that factor that you felt that people were speaking in your ear. You felt people were on your shoulder. You couldn't shut out the sense of sound. And I wonder, I was thinking also about your Marshall McLuhan quotations, and was he talking about the digital, or was he talking about...
No, he was talking about the television.
Yes. So I'm just kind of interested in that, and I don't expect you to necessarily want to answer this, but that kind of relationship between the digital and the pre-digital.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I kind of wanted to make the point too that this is the binaural, the idea of binaural experience and binaural recording is an idea that dates back 100 years or more, and actually the experience that we're talking about here, it is largely analog, I think. However, I think you can still, it does still to me speak to a kind of paradigm of digital simulation, and the fact that the digital recording too erases any sense of its own mediation. So any sense of that kind of scratchiness or graininess that you might get in an analog format is all erased by the digital. So it's completely clean. It is as transparent a medium as you can possibly get. So it enables that really kind of extreme immersion because there is no sense of it being mediated. It's extremely immediate. So I think in that sense it relates to a kind of digital paradigm. There's some really interesting more ambulatory headphone theatre works that are actually playing around with perhaps what might be seen as more of a post-digital, where it's actually trying to kind of undermine that paradigm of digital simulation. And I wasn't talking about that today, but I think it is quite interesting to think about it in that way.
I think it was interesting that you're talking about Janet Cardiff, where, in Janet Cardiff's work you could always hear what was going on outside the headphones as well as what was going on inside. And the kind of way those two things met and moved apart was always interesting and a part of an intentional part of the performance.
Absolutely. And that's not what's happening here so much. This is about a kind of fully immersive experience. To me, that's still quite active, the way in which my mind imagines what's being told to me, the kind of storytelling elements, and I visualise that. I still am amazed by my own perceptual processing in that sense, and I find that very interesting. But these works, they are about that kind of immersion, that playing with the looking and listening, the audio-visual relationship is a whole nother area that's really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. It was a very interesting talk. Thank you. And
Thanks,
a great way to finish off kind of our symposium here, although we haven't finished it. Thank you all very much for your attention, your questions, your involvement. And we hope you'll all now manage to move down to South Street Arts Centre. Do you want to say anything at all at this point about how to get there? Or
I think it's in the conference pack. It's all explained there. There are numbers for taxis and directions. Of course, I'll be walking down, so if anybody wants to walk down with this beautiful day, feel free to join.
And I will also be walking down. And I think. And
you need to say you haven't prepared a headphone.
No, what we're going to do is ask you to do that once you've done that walk down there. And we've got plenty of time. The performance itself isn't till 7. There are drinks at South Street at 6, but there will still be drinks, we hope, at South Street at 6:15.
Depends what time I get there.
Yes. and some canapes. But if you want to pick up a sandwich on the way, or if you want to even go just past the entrance to South Street, you get to the Oracle shopping centre. The bit on the river there has got lots of places to eat or pick up sandwiches or whatever as well. So, you know, we'd like to see you at 7 o'clock. We'd like to see you before 7 o'clock. But please feel free to manage your way down there as you wish. And as I say, we're going down there, so please also feel free to follow us.
Final